close your eyes or leave them open, it doesn't really matter. Either way, you're going to Springfield tonight. Not the Springfield you think you know. Not the one with the couch gag and the yellow family and the jokes you've been quoting since you were old enough to watch late-night television. You're going somewhere deeper than that. Somewhere underneath the surface of the longest-running animated series in the history of American television. Somewhere in the wiring, in the shadows between episodes, in the questions, the show has been quietly asking for 36 years without ever quite answering out loud. Springfield is comfortable. That's the whole point. It's the town that feels like home even if you've never set foot in it. The Simpsons have been sitting on that couch since the 17th of December 1989, and they are sitting there right now, and they will be sitting there long after tonight is over. There is something almost hypnotic about that consistency. The same family, the same street, the same nuclear power plant cooling towers rising against the same cartoon sky, the same saxophone, the same donut, the same strangling. Tonight, we're going to let the familiarity wash over us while we explore what's underneath it. The theories that hold together a little too well. The mysteries that the show introduced and then quietly set down without ever resolving. The patterns that emerge when you watch long enough and carefully enough to notice that Springfield isn't just strange. It's strange in a very specific, very consistent, very deliberate way. You don't need to be fully awake for this. In fact, the half-awake state might be the best place to receive it. Let the words drift past you. Let the images form and dissolve. Let Springfield come to you in fragments, the way it always has, episode by episode, year by year. A little piece of a puzzle that keeps getting larger without ever revealing the full picture. We're going to talk about radiation and comas and immortality and silence, and a baby who may or may not have shot a billionaire. We're going to talk about a mother who vanished, and a town that voted to forget. We're going to talk about why nobody ages, and what that actually means if you take it seriously, and what a man lying in a hospital bed might have to do with all of it. Get comfortable. Breathe slowly. Springfield is just up ahead. Section 1. The town that time forgot. There is a question at the heart of The Simpsons that the show has never answered and never will, and yet it is the most important question the series has ever raised. It is not a complicated question. It is, in fact, one of the simplest questions you could ask about any fictional world. Why doesn't anyone age? Bart Simpson was 10 years old in 1989. He is 10 years old today. Lisa was 8 then. She is 8 now. Maggie was 1. Maggie is still 1. Homer and Marge, somewhere in their mid-30s when the show began, remain somewhere in their mid-30s after 36 calendar years have passed in the real world and approximately 0 have passed in Springfield. The industry has a name for this. It's called a floating timeline, and it's a common enough convention in long-running animated series. The idea is that the show exists in a kind of perpetual present tense. Whatever year it is in the real world is whatever year it is in Springfield. The references are current. The technology matches the era. The cultural touchstones feel contemporary. But the characters themselves remain frozen, locked at the ages they were when the story began, untouched by the passage of time that surrounds them on all sides. Most people accept this without much thought. It's a cartoon. Cartoons don't age. You understand the convention and you move on and you enjoy the show. That's the reasonable response. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has stopped being a convention and started being a problem. A deep, structural, almost philosophical problem that gets stranger the longer you stare at it. Think about what it actually means for a character to exist across 36 years without aging. Think about the memories that would accumulate, the contradictions that would pile up, the fundamental impossibility of a person having a consistent backstory when that backstory has to keep shifting to accommodate a present that won't stop moving forward. Homer and Marge met in high school. That's a fixed point in the show's mythology. One of the things that has remained consistent across decades of storytelling. They were teenagers together. They fell in love. They eventually married and had Bart, and then Lisa, and then Maggie. This is the origin story of the Simpson family, and it has been told and retold in flashback episodes more times than any other story in the series. But here's where the floating timeline starts pulling at the seams. If Homer and Marge are in their mid-30s today, and today is 2025, then they were born somewhere around 1990, which means they would have been high schoolers sometime around 2005 to 2008, which means their teenage romance, the one that has been depicted with period-appropriate music and fashion and cultural references, would have played out against a backdrop of early social media and flip phones and the particular anxieties of the mid-2000s. Except the show has also shown us Homer and Marge as teenagers in the 1970s. And in flashback episodes from the 1990s, their high school years were clearly set during the 1970s, complete with disco music and wide lapels and the particular cultural texture of that decade. Then, as the show continued and the timeline slid forward, the flashbacks had to update. Their teenage years shifted to the 1980s, then to the early 1990s, then to something that doesn't quite map to any specific decade, but gestures vaguely toward whatever feels contemporary enough to not break the immersion entirely. Homer and Marge have had their origin story rewritten at least 4 times. Each version is internally consistent with the episode that contains it. None of the versions are internally consistent with each other. Their past is not a fixed thing. It is a document that gets revised whenever the present demands it. This creates something that should alarm you more than it probably does. The Simpson family does not have a stable history. Their memories are not reliable. The events that shaped them, the experiences that made them who they are, keep changing without any of them noticing. Marge remembers a prom dress from the 1970s in one episode and something entirely different in another. Homer has nostalgia for things that didn't exist when the nostalgia was originally established. The backstory is a fog that reshapes itself around the show's needs rather than a solid foundation that the characters stand on. Now, most viewers process this as a continuity error, something that long-running shows inevitably accumulate and that you simply have to make peace with if you're going to enjoy them. Fair enough. The show has nearly 800 episodes. Perfect continuity across that span of content is a fantasy. But there's another way to look at it. What if the characters' unstable memories aren't an error? What if they're a symptom? Because when you start cataloging the things that Springfield's residents can't seem to remember or hold on to, you realize that the floating timeline is just one piece of a much larger pattern. Springfield forgets things constantly. The town has survived catastrophes that should have permanently altered its character, and then by the following week, everything is back to normal. The catastrophe unacknowledged, the damage repaired, the memory wiped clean. The town has been destroyed. It has been rebuilt. It has been sealed under a dome by the federal government. It has experienced alien encounters, environmental disasters, near-nuclear meltdowns, and events so dramatic that any real community would spend years processing the aftermath. And Springfield processes none of it. The reset is total, the slate is clean, and the floating timeline is the most visible expression of that larger amnesia. The inability or unwillingness of Springfield and its residents to let time accumulate, to let consequences stick, to let the past be a real thing that shapes the present. The show has imagined its characters as older people. It has done this several times, in episodes that function as flash-forward glimpses of what The Simpsons might become if time were actually allowed to touch them. One of the most famous of these is the Season 6 episode called Lisa's Wedding, which aired in 1995 and depicts a future version of Springfield where Lisa is a young woman in her early 20s, engaged to a man she's met at college, navigating the complicated emotional terrain of growing up and away from her family. The future the episode depicts is detailed and specific and emotionally rich in a way that the show's regular timeline rarely allows itself to be. Future Lisa has become the person you always suspected she'd become. Highly educated, principled, a little lonely, still deeply tethered to her family even as she tries to build a life that exceeds what Springfield offered her. Future Homer is older and softer and somehow more touching than his present-day version. Future Marge is still Marge, patient and loving and quietly holding everything together. The episode is beautiful. It's one of the most genuinely moving pieces of television The Simpsons has ever produced. And then it ends. And the next episode begins, and Lisa is 8 years old again, and the flash forward is sealed away like something too painful to keep looking at. The show knows how to imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. The future is something that can be glimpsed from a safe distance but never entered. The present holds its shape with an intensity that starts to feel less like narrative convenience and more like something it's afraid of losing. Think about why a story would be afraid of its characters growing up. The obvious answer is commercial. The Simpsons is a franchise. Bart's face is on merchandise across the world. Homer's catchphrases are embedded in the cultural vocabulary of multiple generations. The brand depends on the characters remaining recognizable, and the characters remaining recognizable depends on them remaining essentially unchanged. Aging would alter them in ways that couldn't be easily reversed, and in a business context, that risk is simply not worth taking. But there's an emotional answer too, and it's the one that the floating timeline points toward when you really sit with it. The Simpsons is, at its core, a story about a family, about the particular, irreplaceable quality of family life during the years when children are young, and the household is full and every evening brings everyone back under the same roof. There is a specific texture to that period of life, the chaos and the noise and the love that runs underneath all of it, and it is not permanent. Children grow up, they leave, the house empties, the table has fewer plates on it. Time takes the fullness away, gently but completely, and what remains is different in kind from what came before. Not worse, necessarily, but different in a way that can't be undone. The Simpsons froze at that moment, the moment of fullness. Bart still in the house, still a troublemaker, still needing Homer's fumbling guidance. Lisa still at the kitchen table, still asking questions nobody else in the family quite knows how to answer. Maggie still in the high chair, still small enough to hold, still at the beginning of everything. And Homer still coming through the door at the end of the day, still the imperfect, stumbling center of a family that somehow holds together despite everything. That moment is preserved, sealed in amber, kept perfectly intact across 36 years and nearly 800 episodes. And the fans keep coming back to it, week after week, year after year, because the thing that Springfield offers is something real life cannot. The guarantee that the family will still be there, that the house will look the same, that the couch will hold the same people in the same arrangement, that the particular shape of this particular family is not subject to the ordinary erosions of time. It is, when you think about it, a form of grief management. We watch The Simpsons, and the family doesn't change. And for the duration of the episode, we don't have to think about the things in our own lives that do change, that have changed, that will continue to change whether we want them to or not. The floating timeline is a gift to the audience as much as it's a narrative device for the show. But underneath that comfort, underneath that carefully maintained stasis, the theory suggests something is actually causing the freeze. Something within Springfield's reality, not just within the show's production logic, that is actively preventing time from functioning normally. And those theories, each of them approaching the problem from a different angle, each of them finding different evidence in the show's 36 years of accumulated material, all converge on the same unsettling conclusion. Time stopped in Springfield because something stopped it. The radiation theory says the nuclear plant mutated the population's biology so fundamentally that normal aging processes no longer apply. The coma theory says no time is actually passing because the entire post-1993 run of the show is a dream being generated by an unconscious man in a hospital bed, and dreams don't have to obey time. The collective denial theory says Springfield has simply voted, as a community, to ignore the passage of time, the way it ignores everything else that threatens the comfortable fiction it has built around itself. The Burns immortality theory says that if one man in Springfield has found a way to stop aging through medical intervention and sheer wealth, then the concept of time itself has been destabilized within the town's reality. Each theory finds its evidence in the floating timeline. Each theory uses the ageless children and the unchanging adults as a central piece of its argument. And none of them can be definitively disproven because the show itself has never definitively explained why 36 years pass for the audience, and none of them pass for the characters. The official explanation is that it's just how animated shows work, and that's true. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the convention has accumulated enough weight to become something more than a convention. It has become a feature of Springfield's identity. The town does not age. The town does not change. The town holds its shape against all pressure, all time, all catastrophe. And somewhere in that relentless, impossible persistence, there is a mystery worth exploring. A question worth sitting with in the quiet before sleep comes. Not the question of how the show manages its timeline, but the question of what it means, within the logic of Springfield's own reality, that time refuses to touch the people who live there. We'll come back to that question. Everything we're going to explore tonight comes back to that question eventually. But first, let's start with what might be causing it. The theory that sits at the base of everything else, the one that has the most evidence, the most canonical support, the most ability to explain the largest number of Springfield's many mysteries in a single coherent framework. Let's talk about what the nuclear plant has been doing to the water. Before we go on, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you're enjoying this so far, a subscription means you'll be here for the next one. Now, back to Springfield. Section 2. The Nuclear Secret. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not a background detail. You might have spent years treating it as one. The way you treat the water tower or the tire fire or the gorge or any of the other recurring visual elements that give Springfield its distinctive skyline. The plant is just part of the scenery. The thing Homer drives to every morning and drives away from every evening, the source of his paycheck and, occasionally, his peril. It's furniture. It's set dressing. Except it isn't. The plant is the engine of Springfield. The theory that the nuclear facility has been slowly, systematically mutating the entire town and everyone in it is not a fringe reading of the show's subtext. It is supported by so much canonical evidence, stated so clearly and so repeatedly across so many episodes, that the real mystery is how the show has been telling you this for 36 years, and most of its audience has processed it as comedy rather than confession. Let's start with the basics. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town, which means every home, every business, every school, every hospital in Springfield is dependent on this facility for the energy that keeps the lights on. And this facility, the one that powers every corner of Springfield's life, is by any reasonable standard of measurement one of the most dangerous industrial sites ever depicted in fiction. A surprise safety inspection of the plant found 342 violations. 342. The estimated cost to bring the plant into compliance with basic safety standards was $56 million. Charles Montgomery Burns is a billionaire many times over. He has resources that the show has established can fund private medical research programs, entire pharmaceutical divisions, and schemes of planetary scale. The $56 million was not the problem. The problem was that spending it would mean acknowledging that the violations existed, and acknowledging that they existed would invite the obvious follow-up question, which was what those violations had already done to the people living and working and breathing and drinking water in the vicinity of an actively leaking reactor facility. So Burns didn't fix the violations. He kept them. He paid Homer Simpson, the facility's safety inspector, to continue not noticing them. And the violations themselves are not minor administrative paperwork issues. They include radioactive waste being dumped directly into bodies of water, radioactive waste being left on children's playgrounds, plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's office desk, cooling towers cracked and patched with chewing gum, luminous rats running through the facility's internal corridors, and one detail the show drops with remarkable casualness and never returns to: human skeletons in the basement. Human skeletal remains inside an active nuclear power plant. The inspection surfaces them. The episode acknowledges them. And then the show moves on, as if finding bones in a reactor facility is the kind of thing that doesn't require explanation or follow-up. Nobody in Springfield asks who those people were. Now consider the man whose literal job is to prevent all of this from harming the population. Homer Simpson serves as the safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. His job in theory is to identify and report safety violations, to monitor the facility's compliance with regulatory standards, to stand between the residents of Springfield and the various ways in which an improperly maintained nuclear reactor might harm them. He is the human buffer between the town and the radiation. Homer has an IQ that the show's own creator has placed at 55. He has a crayon lodged in his brain from childhood, which the show establishes is physically reducing his cognitive function. He sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. In one episode, he causes a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core because he was curious whether it would get bigger. In another, he is described as having caused 742 documented errors during his tenure at the plant. Errors significant enough to be tracked and cataloged, none of which resulted in his termination. That last detail matters more than it initially seems. We'll come back to it. For now, sit with the image. A cracked reactor facility with 342 safety violations, staffed by a man with an IQ of 55 who falls asleep next to the control panel, surrounded by a town that uses the facility's power and drinks the water downstream of its waste disposal sites. This has been the situation in Springfield for over 3 decades. The first visible evidence of what this situation is doing to the local ecosystem appears in Season 2, Blinky the fish. Blinky is pulled from a river near the power plant. Blinky has 3 eyes. A real fish. A fish that was presumably born in the water that runs adjacent to a nuclear facility that has been illegally dumping radioactive waste into that same water. And Blinky has developed a 3rd eye. Within the show's universe, Blinky becomes national news. A gubernatorial candidate uses the 3-eyed fish as evidence that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns is forced to eat Blinky on live television to demonstrate that the fish is harmless. The town watches, shrugs, moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody asks the question that should be hanging in the air over every scene that follows. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people drinking the same water? The show's answer to that question has been visible since the very beginning. It just requires you to look at the residents themselves carefully, with the radiation theory as your lens. Homer Simpson. Massive overbite. Eyes that bulge slightly beyond the proportions you'd expect in normal human anatomy. 4 fingers on each hand. A skull shape that doesn't map cleanly to any biological template. An intelligence so far below average that it constitutes a clinical disability. A body capable of absorbing and recovering from physical trauma that would kill a normal person. Falling off cliffs, being struck by cars, electrocution, explosion, and dozens of other events across the series that he walks away from without lasting consequence. His healing rate is absurd. His pain tolerance is inhuman. Marge Simpson. The same slightly exaggerated eyes, the 4 fingers, hair that defies physics and gravity, growing straight up in a tower that has maintained its exact shape for 36 years without apparent effort, a structural achievement that no amount of styling product could explain in the real world. Bart, Lisa, Maggie, born in Springfield, raised in Springfield, drinking Springfield's water, breathing Springfield's air, all of them displaying the same physical characteristics that deviate from standard human proportions in the same directions. Yellow skin. Across the entire resident population of Springfield, yellow skin. That specific shade of pale yellow that covers every face in town. Now here's the detail that locks this theory into place. The one that elevates it from interesting observation to something that deserves serious attention. When visitors arrive in Springfield, when guest characters travel to the town from the outside world, they look different. Not slightly different. Fundamentally different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes sit in their faces at more realistic angles. Their features have a quality that more closely resembles actual human anatomy than Springfield's permanent residents. The show draws outsiders with more realistic proportions than it draws the people who live there. The standard explanation for this is art style. The Simpsons has a distinctive visual language, and it applies that language to its main cast while guest characters are sometimes drawn more naturalistically to emphasize their outsider status. That's the production logic. That's why it happens technically. But within the logic of Springfield's own reality, within the fictional world the show has constructed, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live inside Springfield and people who come from outside it. The residents of the contaminated zone look one way. The people from the rest of the world look another way. And that difference maps perfectly onto what you'd expect if the residents had been exposed to something that visitors had not. The animals confirm it. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same slightly exaggerated eyes as his owners, the same proportional deviations. Even the household pet shows the markers. And Blinky, of course, has 3 eyes, and Blinky lives in the river that runs next to the plant, and the show tells you directly, through the episode where Blinky becomes a news story, that the fish's mutation is caused by the plant's radioactive runoff. The show tells you the fish mutated because of the radiation. The fish live in the same environment as the humans. The humans show consistent physical deviations from normal anatomy. But somehow the show expects you to accept that the radiation affected the fish, but not the people. That's the sleight of hand. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Burns knows. This is perhaps the most important part of the radiation theory, because it transforms the situation from a tragedy of negligence into something considerably darker. The contamination of Springfield isn't an accident that Burns has failed to address. It's a condition that Burns is actively managing, for his own benefit, at the expense of everyone else. The show establishes in the episode called The Springfield Files that Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. This treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without the next dose, he dies. His body glows. He wanders out of the treatment facility in a chemically altered, dazed state, stumbling through the woods like something from another world. Burns is saturated with radiation. His body requires regular doses of whatever substances and procedures his medical team administers to maintain the delicate biological equilibrium that keeps him functioning. He is not just the owner of a nuclear facility. He is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own life. He understands what radiation does to biological systems in a way that is intimate and experiential, not just theoretical, because radiation is the thing that keeps him alive. And if radiation keeps Burns alive, then Burns has a direct financial and personal incentive to maintain the conditions that make his treatments available. The power plant generates the revenue that funds his medical infrastructure. The medical infrastructure keeps Burns alive. Burns alive means the power plant keeps running. The power plant keeps running means the violations continue. The violations continuing means the radiation keeps leaking. The radiation leaking means the residents of Springfield stay in the cognitive fog that prevents them from challenging Burns's control. It's a closed loop, a self-sustaining system, and at the center of it is Homer Simpson, the most perfectly placed component in the entire mechanism. When German investors briefly purchased the Springfield nuclear power plant, the very first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the cost of bringing the facility up to code, and the estimate nearly bankrupted them. Then Burns bought the plant back and rehired Homer immediately. Think about that sequence of events. The new owners, rational business people with no particular attachment to Springfield or its residents, look at the situation and conclude that Homer has to go. That's the obvious call. Homer is catastrophically bad at his job. He should have been dismissed years ago. A competent safety inspector would have forced the facility into compliance long before the violations reached 342. A competent safety inspector would have shut the plant down pending remediation. A competent safety inspector is the last thing Burns needs. Homer's continued employment isn't negligence. Burns remembers Homer's name with remarkable inconsistency throughout the series, frequently failing to recognize the man who works for him, and sometimes getting his name spectacularly wrong. But he keeps hiring him back. He protected Homer's job through a deal with Grandpa Simpson, the full mechanics of which we'll explore later. He ensures that the person standing between Springfield and nuclear catastrophe is someone constitutionally incapable of preventing it. And then there's the episode where Homer's IQ skyrockets. In Season 12, it is discovered that a crayon has been lodged in Homer's brain since childhood. The crayon is removed, and when it's gone, Homer becomes a different person. Intelligent, articulate, analytical, capable of understanding the world around him with a clarity he has never possessed before. His IQ jumps to well above average. He can solve problems. He can engage with complex ideas. He can see Springfield for what it actually is. And it makes him miserable. He sees his job for what it is. He sees the facility. He sees the violations. He sees the fog he's been living inside. He sees the architecture of a life that was constructed around him without his knowledge or consent, and the clarity is unbearable. The weight of understanding what Springfield is and what has been done to it and to him is too heavy to carry. So he has the crayon put back in. He chooses not to know. He goes back into the fog voluntarily. And the show frames this as a kind of mercy to himself. A man choosing comfort over truth because truth was too sharp to live with. But the radiation theory adds another layer. Homer's choice makes complete sense if his baseline state, the state of slightly reduced capacity that comes with the crayon in place, is actually more comfortable within Springfield's environment because that environment was designed to produce exactly that state. The town is calibrated for a certain level of cognitive function. The water, the air, the general atmospheric exposure to whatever the plant has been releasing for decades produces residents who exist at a particular point on the spectrum between full capacity and impairment. Homer with the crayon removed shoots above that point and finds the air up there unbreathable. Homer with the crayon in place settles back into the band that Springfield's environment is calibrated to maintain. The crayon is doing some of the work. The radiation is doing the rest. And this is the theory's most disturbing implication. Springfield isn't a quirky town where unusual things happen because that's what the plot requires. Springfield is a contamination zone where the population's biology and cognition have been systematically altered by decades of radiation exposure. The yellow skin is a symptom. The 4 fingers are a symptom. The exaggerated physical features are symptoms. The inability to hold memories of catastrophic events, the persistent cognitive fog that prevents residents from asking obvious questions about their own situation, the physical resilience that lets Homer survive things no normal human should survive, these are all symptoms of the same underlying cause. The plant, the violations, the chewing gum holding the cooling tower together, the bones in the basement, the luminous rats in the corridors, the waste in the water, the invisible, persistent, decades-long irradiation of every living thing in Springfield that is too small and too consistent and too constant to notice unless you already know to look for it. And when you look at the Simpsons movie, the accumulated evidence becomes overwhelming. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point where the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal regulatory body operating within the show's fictional universe, determines that the town needs to be physically sealed under a massive glass dome to prevent its pollution from affecting the surrounding region. The United States government, within the logic of the show, looks at Springfield and concludes that the entire town is so contaminated, so fundamentally toxic, so irreversibly polluted that containment is the only viable option. They don't try to clean it up. They don't remediate it. They seal it. Because some things the show implies are beyond remediation. Some damage is too complete, too thorough, too deeply integrated into the environment it has affected. And the people inside the dome, when it goes up, the residents who have been living in that contaminated environment all along, they stay inside it. That is the radiation theory. Not metaphor, not satire, not an observation about industrial pollution delivered through the medium of animated comedy. Within the logic of Springfield's own reality, the nuclear power plant has been doing something specific and measurable and consequential to the people who live in its shadow. The evidence is in their bodies. It's in their fish. It's in their inability to remember. It's in the dome the government had to build to keep the contamination from spreading. Springfield isn't a quirky cartoon town. Springfield is a case study. And the experiment has been running for 36 years without the subjects ever figuring out that they're in it. Breathe slowly. We're going deeper. Section 3. Homer's Coma. On the 1st of April, 1993, something happened that the show treated as a punchline and that a certain kind of fan has never quite been able to let go of. The 18th episode of the 4th season aired. It was a clip show, the kind of episode that stitches together highlights from previous seasons with a thin narrative wrapper. The narrative wrapper this time involved Bart playing increasingly escalating April Fool's pranks on Homer, culminating in taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it inside an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens the can, the pressure that has built inside it produces an explosion, violent enough to send him to the hospital. In the hospital, recovering, Homer spots a vending machine across the room. He tries to reach the candy bar inside. The vending machine tips over. It crushes him, and Homer Simpson flatlines and enters a clinical coma. This is not played as a cutaway gag. This is not a dream sequence. This is not a Treehouse of Horror episode where the normal rules are suspended. Within the show's regular continuity, in a standard Season 4 episode, Homer Simpson enters a real and medically serious coma that lasts for 7 weeks. Then, at the end of the episode, Homer appears to wake up. Bart tearfully confesses at his bedside. Homer springs awake and immediately strangles his son. The family laughs. Homer laughs. Everything returns to normal. The episode ends. But in the final moments before it does, the show reveals something that it then apparently forgets it revealed. Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%? Gone? Permanently? Destroyed by the weeks of unconsciousness. The doctor tells him this. Homer responds by laughing, then immediately admitting that he doesn't know why he's laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. And then 32 more years of The Simpsons unfold, as if none of it happened. Unless none of it did. The Homer coma theory is the single most popular, most debated, and most internally consistent fan theory in the history of The Simpsons. Its basic premise is straightforward, and it was first articulated comprehensively by a Reddit user whose handle was something along the lines of "hard topic, a name," though the specific origin point is less important than the idea itself, which spread through the Simpsons fan community because it explains things that nothing else explains quite as elegantly. Homer did not wake up from his coma in April of 1993. The apparent awakening at the end of the episode is not a real event. It is the first dream. Everything that follows, every episode that has aired from that point forward, every storyline and guest appearance, an impossible adventure and world-altering event, is being generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed at Springfield General, losing brain function slowly and continuously while his family sits beside him and waits. The evidence for this theory is the kind that makes you stop and stare at it. Start with what the show was before the coma episode and what it became afterward. The first 4 seasons of The Simpsons are, by general critical consensus, a grounded show. Not realistic in any strict sense. It was always a cartoon, always working in heightened registers, always willing to push comedy into absurdity. But the stories were rooted in recognizable human territory. Homer struggling with his weight and his drinking and his self-worth, Marge navigating the particular frustrations of a woman whose intelligence and capability are consistently underestimated by everyone around her, including her husband. Lisa developing crushes and confronting the gap between her intellectual gifts and her social situation. Bart wrestling with academic failure and the particular loneliness of a child who is too charismatic to be ignored and too troubled to be fully embraced. These are family stories. They are exaggerated versions of the kinds of things that happen in actual households. Financial stress, marital tension, academic struggles, the push and pull of a family that loves each other and also drives each other into low-grade madness on a daily basis. The emotional core of early Simpsons is built on situations that viewers can recognize because those situations, in some form, have happened to them. After the coma episode, the tonal shift is seismic. Homer goes to space. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer joins a secret society that turns out to run the world. Homer discovers his mother is alive and has been a fugitive radical all these years. Homer meets God, not metaphorically, not in a dream sequence within the episode, but in what the show presents as an actual theological encounter, and this happens more than once. Homer becomes a bodyguard, a boxer, a food critic, a missionary, a country music manager. He holds something like 100 different jobs across the later seasons, jobs that have nothing to do with his established background or qualifications, that he acquires and loses within a single episode, that leave no lasting trace on his life or circumstances. The escalation is not subtle. Longtime fans have been debating the exact moment. The Simpsons changed its character for decades, arguing about which season marked the turn, which writer or producer or network pressure caused the shift in tone. The coma theory argues that the debate has always been looking for an answer in the wrong place. The shift didn't happen because of a creative decision. It happened because Homer's brain got worse. A deteriorating brain generating a prolonged dream would produce exactly this pattern. Early in the coma, the dream would be relatively coherent, drawing on clear memories and stable emotional architecture, producing stories that feel grounded and recognizable. But as the brain continues to lose function, as the neural structures that maintain coherent narrative begin to degrade, the dream would start to loosen, the rules would soften, impossible things would become possible. The internal logic that kept the early episodes feeling real would give way to something freer, stranger, more governed by desire and fear than by any kind of plausibility. Homer goes to space because his dreaming brain doesn't remember that ordinary people can't go to space. Homer meets celebrities because his unconscious mind is absorbing sounds and voices from the hospital room and weaving them into the dream without the filtering that waking cognition would apply. Homer survives everything because nothing can actually happen to his body, which is lying still in a hospital bed, and the dream simply cannot kill the dreamer. And nobody ages because the dream is running on frozen reference material. This is the coma theory's most elegant answer to the floating timeline, and it is the answer that makes the emotional weight of the theory so difficult to shake. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April of 1993. Homer's children don't grow up because he wasn't there to watch them grow. His wife doesn't change because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly the way she looks in every episode of the show. His friends, his neighbors, his colleagues, all of them preserved at the exact age and state they were in when the vending machine fell. A coma doesn't just take consciousness away, it takes time away. The person in the coma doesn't experience the years that pass. They go under at one moment and come up, if they come up, at another, and the world between those 2 points is simply absent. For Homer, the world stopped in the spring of 1993. His children stopped at 10 and 8 and 1. His wife stopped at whatever age Marge was when he went under. And his unconscious mind, doing what unconscious minds do, keeps the world frozen at the last moment he experienced it, because it has no other reference material to work from. The celebrity appearances that flood later seasons make sense through this lens. By the time the show reaches seasons 12 and 15 and 20, Homer's dream is packed with famous faces, musicians and athletes and actors and politicians cycling through Springfield with a frequency that strains even the show's already elastic credibility. The coma theory says this isn't poor creative choices accumulating. It's Homer's brain in the hospital room, absorbing ambient sound from a television that his family has left on to give him something to hear, catching fragments of pop culture and celebrity gossip and news broadcasts, and incorporating them into the dream, because that's what stimulus-absorbing unconscious minds do with external input. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the fog, a name that filtered through the medical equipment and the antiseptic smell and the quiet conversations at his bedside, and got woven into the fabric of the dream because his brain needed material and the hospital room was providing it. Now consider the theological dimension. 6 months before the coma episode aired, the show broadcast the season 4 premiere, an episode called Homer the Heretic. In this episode, Homer has a direct, face-to-face conversation with God, an actual theological encounter, not framed as metaphor or hallucination. Homer speaks to a divine presence that speaks back to him, and during that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. God tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life. But not yet. His time is coming. Not yet, but soon. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline sits there and waits for you to notice it. Homer is told by a divine presence that his time is coming. 6 months pass, a vending machine falls, and Homer's conscious life, the life where he is awake and present and actually in the world, ends. What follows, the theory argues, is exactly what God described: Homer learning the meaning of life. Not through wisdom or enlightenment, but through the dream, through the extended, deteriorating, impossible dream of a man who loves his family so completely that even his unconscious mind can't let them go. The show itself engaged with this theory directly, which is significant. In season 34, the writers created a scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma, and it is revealed that all the outlandish episodes were dreams. This scene was then presented as a fake deleted scene, planted in the show's material as a hoax by fictional hackers, a clever piece of misdirection that let the writers acknowledge the theory while maintaining official deniability. But they made it, they animated it, they gave it to the audience and then said, just kidding. And the fact that they made it at all, the fact that the theory warranted a direct creative response from the people who make the show, tells you something about how seriously it has been taken even within the production itself. Al Jean, one of the show's longtime executive producers, addressed the theory publicly and dismissed it. He said it isn't true. He said Homer woke up. But what he didn't address is the actual evidence. He didn't explain why no one ages. He didn't explain the tonal shift after season 4. He didn't explain why the show becomes progressively more surreal and detached from anything resembling consequence with each passing season. He didn't explain why every catastrophe resets and every disaster gets forgotten and every world-altering event leaves no trace on the following week's episode. He said it's not true, and the interviewer moved on. The fans didn't move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever done. It makes everything make sense. The aging freeze, the tonal escalation, the celebrity flood, the physics-defying resilience of a man who survives things that should kill him. All of it explained by a single premise. Homer's body is in a hospital bed, only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind, which cannot die because it is the one generating the story, will keep Springfield running for as long as it keeps running. There is a version of this theory that is purely analytical, that treats the coma as a narrative explanatory device for production choices. That version is interesting in a structural way. But there's another version that sits differently. The version that thinks about what Homer would be dreaming about and why, and what that says about the kind of man he actually is beneath all the comedy. Homer Simpson's deepest wish is not complicated. It is not ambitious or philosophical or particularly sophisticated. He wants his family. That is the entire desire. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, infuriating, essentially good-hearted little boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room, still questioning everything, still exactly the person she was at 8 years old. He wants Maggie small enough to pick up and hold and carry. He wants Friday night on Evergreen Terrace with everyone under the same roof and the television on and the beer cold and nothing ending. In the coma, the dream gives him all of it, perfectly preserved, forever. The children never grow up because Homer's heart can't bear to let them. The family never falls apart because Homer's mind needs it to hold together. Every episode ends with the family intact because the dreamer cannot bring himself to imagine an ending that doesn't. The reset button, the clean slate at the beginning of every episode, the magical erasure of whatever consequences the previous half-hour produced, isn't lazy writing. It's Homer's unconscious mind refusing to let the consequences accumulate into something that might be real. Because if things become real, if consequences stick and time passes and Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9, then Homer is one step closer to having to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has actually passed while he was under, how old his children really are, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting at his bedside, or whether no one is there because the wait became too long and the outcome became too clear and life went on without him the way life does. That's the coma theory. Homer Simpson has been dreaming since April of 1993. Every episode since then has been a love letter written in sleep, addressed to a family he can't reach and can't stop missing, preserved in amber by a mind that loves them too much to let them change. The show will never confirm it, but it won't disprove it either. Because the evidence isn't hidden in the margins or buried in subtext. It's in the structure of the show itself. Every reset, every impossible survival, every ageless face on Evergreen Terrace. Homer is still there. The vending machine is still falling. And Springfield keeps going. Because in the dream, it always does. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Before we go any further, let's acknowledge something directly. The official answer to who shot Mr. Burns is Maggie Simpson, the show told us. Season 7, Episode 1. The resolution of the most elaborate mystery ever attempted by an American animated series. Baby did it. Case closed. Move on. Except the case has never felt closed. Not entirely. Not to the fans who have been pulling at its threads for 30 years. Because the evidence doesn't quite add up the way the show wants it to. And the more carefully you look at the mystery's architecture, the more you start to suspect that the official answer might be less a solution than a decision, something the writers chose rather than something the clues actually pointed toward. Let's go back to the summer of 1995, because that's where this story really starts. The Simpsons had been building towards something for the latter part of Season 6. Mr. Burns had been escalating his schemes across multiple episodes, doing damage to nearly every character in Springfield's regular cast in ways that were specific enough to feel personal. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary School, gutting the school's budget in a single stroke. He shut down Moe's Tavern by financially ruining its owner. He created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield Retirement Castle, displacing its elderly residents. He injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, in the course of one of his schemes. And then, for his crowning achievement, he built a mechanical sun-blocking device and used it to plunge Springfield into permanent artificial darkness, so that the residents would have no choice but to purchase their electricity from his power plant. Not metaphorically. Burns literally stole the sun from the town. When Smithers objected to this plan, his oldest and most loyal assistant, the man who had devoted his life to Burns's service, Burns fired him immediately. With no hesitation, by the end of the first part of the two-part story, every named character in Springfield had a clear, specific, personal motive to want Burns dead or at least grievously wounded. The show took its time establishing this. Homer, because Burns could never remember his name despite Homer working for him for years, a running indignity that the show made clear had built into something genuinely festering beneath the surface. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its funding. Grandpa Simpson, because his retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his job. Tito Puente, because the school's music program was cut. Mo, because his bar went under. Smithers, fired and spiraling. The town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. Multiple characters were shown holding weapons. The tension had been building for an entire season. Then Burns collapsed, a single gunshot wound. He staggered onto the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on two specific letters, W and S, or, from Burns's perspective since he was facing the other direction, M and S. The ambulance carried him away. The screen went black, and America had to wait an entire summer to find out who pulled the trigger. This was, at the time, a genuine cultural event. Fox promoted it as such. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special, treating the fictional crime as a real unsolved case. The show's creators invited viewers to participate in a national contest to guess the shooter. The prize was significant. The winning guesser would be animated into a future episode of the show. Thousands of entries were submitted. Not one person from the randomly selected sample of entries guessed correctly. Let that sit for a moment. The show created a mystery and told the audience it was solvable from the clues in Part 1. They promoted a national contest around it. And when the answer was revealed and the submissions were reviewed, nobody, from the sample of entries examined, had arrived at the right answer through the available evidence. The writers acknowledged on the DVD commentary that they were aware of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer to a Simpsons online forum on the night the first episode aired. This person was using a college internet account. By the time the production team tried to track them down after the reveal, the account was inactive. They couldn't find the one person who got it right. They issued an open invitation for that person to come forward on the DVD release. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what that means for the mystery's integrity. If the clues were sufficient and the answer was fair, you'd expect a reasonable percentage of a large sample of engaged viewers to arrive at the correct conclusion. Nobody did. Either the clues were insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer didn't follow logically from the evidence in the way the show claimed it did. Now let's look at the sundial. Burns's hands land on W and S, which from his perspective read as M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. The sundial is the central visual clue of the mystery, the image that was reproduced and discussed and analyzed all summer. It's the show's fingerprint, its signature piece of evidence. Except Burns himself, on waking from his coma, states explicitly that his hands landing on those letters was not intentional. He didn't consciously position himself to point at his attacker's initials. He simply fell. The sundial clue, the central piece of evidence the show uses to support its answer, was explicitly described by the victim as meaningless. The biggest clue in the mystery is meaningless according to the person it supposedly came from. Then there's the gun. Shortly before the shooting, Burns's holster is shown to be empty. The gun was already missing from his person before the attack. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon, which means the shooter was someone who didn't arrive at the town meeting armed, someone who didn't plan to shoot anyone, who encountered Burns's gun by chance and used it in a moment of impulse or opportunity. This is actually a useful narrowing of the suspect pool. Most of the primary suspects at the meeting were shown to be carrying weapons. They brought them because they were angry enough to be carrying weapons. The person who shot Burns was someone who wasn't armed, who stumbled onto the weapon and acted on it. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does any number of other characters who might not have been visibly armed. Now consider Burns's final words before being shot. According to the reconstruction, he said, "Oh, it's you." 3 words. And those words carry an enormous amount of information if you take them seriously. Oh, it's you. This is recognition. This is someone seeing a face they know and identifying it with a familiarity that carries no particular alarm. Not, "Who are you?" Not fear or surprise. The specific phrasing suggests someone Burns expected to encounter at some point, someone whose presence in his vicinity made a certain kind of sense to him, someone he would encounter and greet with casual recognition rather than wariness. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson in this way? Has he ever interacted meaningfully with Maggie prior to this episode? The show does not establish a relationship between them. Burns barely recognizes Homer, and Homer works for him directly. The idea that Burns would see a 1-year-old baby and respond with casual, non-alarmed recognition as if greeting a familiar acquaintance is, to put it gently, a stretch. Oh, it's you is how you greet someone you've had dealings with? Someone whose appearance in your orbit makes contextual sense. It's not how you react to unexpectedly encountering a baby in a parking lot. And then in season 18, years after the shooting mystery was officially resolved, Homer says something that the show treats as a throwaway moment and then immediately forgets. Homer claims that he was actually the one who shot Burns. He says it on camera. Nobody reacts, nobody investigates, nobody reopens the case. The confession just sits there, acknowledged and then abandoned, the show apparently unwilling to commit to either validating it or refuting it. If Homer is lying for attention, that's one thing. That is not entirely out of character. But if Homer is telling the truth, and the pattern of evidence we've been examining suggests the possibility is at least worth considering, then the official verdict was wrong. A baby was blamed for a crime committed by her father. And the evidence that supported Maggie's guilt, the DNA, the sundial, the testimony of a man who had just emerged from a bullet wound-induced coma, was either manufactured, misinterpreted, or produced under conditions that should have made it inadmissible. Then there's the Marge theory. A compelling argument has been made by at least one close analyst of the episode that Marge is the actual shooter. The case is built on a few key observations. Marge is a devoted mother who watched Burns systematically destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and literally steal the sun from the town where her children live and breathe. She had substantial motive. She is the kind of character who might encounter Burns in a parking lot after the town meeting and feel the accumulated weight of all of it hit her at once. But the most interesting element of the Marge theory isn't the motive. It's Burns's behavior after he wakes up. Burns was infatuated with Marge in a previous episode. The show established this directly. He fell for her during the period when she worked at the plant. He was genuinely, if characteristically creepy and ineffective, smitten with her. If Burns woke from his coma and recognized that Marge was the person who had shot him, would he identify her to the police? The Marge theory says he wouldn't. He'd protect her. He'd take the bullet, wake up, and rather than name the woman he'd been infatuated with, he'd look around the room for an alternative explanation and land on the thing his hands were pointing at. A baby? Conveniently unable to be prosecuted? Conveniently unable to deny the accusation? Conveniently the perfect fall for a crime Burns would rather see go unsolved than see Marge Simpson go to prison for it. Chief Wiggum says it himself in the resolution. No jury in the world would convict a baby, except maybe Texas. Maggie is the cleanest possible solution if someone needed the investigation closed without the real shooter facing consequences. The alternate ending deepens the mystery rather than clarifying it. A complete alternate conclusion was animated, in which Smithers is the shooter. Fully voiced, fully produced, a complete alternative resolution to the mystery. It was shown in a clip show format, and Troy McClure dismisses it by saying it wouldn't have made sense because the Simpson DNA evidence would have to be ignored, which would be downright nutty. And then he makes a joke about the O.J. Simpson trial, where a jury in the real world ignored DNA evidence and acquitted someone anyway. The show is winking. It is telling you directly that the official answer isn't necessarily the correct answer. It is telling you that evidence can point wherever the people in power want it to point. It is telling you that we had DNA evidence, and therefore the right person was convicted, are two different sentences that do not necessarily imply each other. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers seriously considered this option before abandoning it. The fact that the answer cycled through multiple candidates, Smithers, Barney, presumably others before the final choice was made, tells you something important about the relationship between the mystery's clues and its resolution. The answer was not discovered by following the evidence. The evidence was adjusted to fit whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered. And here is the question that doesn't get asked often enough. In a town where every single person had a motive, where dozens of people were carrying weapons, where the victim had just stolen the literal sun from the community and plunged them into artificial darkness, how is it possible that only one person acted? Springfield is not a town known for restraint. These people riot with regularity. They form mobs over trivial misunderstandings. They've burned down their own structures over misunderstandings that took maybe 20 minutes to develop. But when Burns blocks out the sun and directly threatens the survival of every living thing in the community, only one person pulls a trigger? Either the shooting was more planned and more deliberate than the official story suggests, or there were multiple people prepared to act and one simply got there first. Or something about the official account, including the question of who that first person actually was, is not quite what it appears. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The writers committed to it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled. But the contest nobody won, the clue the victim himself described as meaningless, the alternate endings that were fully produced, the season 18 confession that was never investigated, and the final shot of Maggie making a trigger-pulling motion alone in an empty room after checking to make sure no one is watching, all of it suggests something more complicated than a baby accidentally discharging a weapon in a parking lot. The greatest mystery in Simpsons history was not solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, as we've established, those are two very different things. Section 5. The immortality of Mr. Burns. How is Mr. Burns still alive? Not in the cartoon logic sense, where the question answers itself. Of course, he's still alive, the show needs him. But within the established reality of Springfield, within the fictional universe the show has constructed across 36 years of storytelling, Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility whose existence raises questions that the show has gestured toward without ever fully confronting. His age has been stated, implied, contradicted, and revised across dozens of episodes. Every version of the timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 1800s. He has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has told stories about events from the 1910s as though he was present for them as a participant rather than a student of history. He has described working relationships with figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. By the most conservative reading of the show's continuity, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the more generous readings, he might be approaching 140. And he doesn't merely exist. He functions at an extraordinary level. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He manipulates municipal and state-level politics with practiced ease. He orchestrates schemes that require sustained strategic thinking, long-term planning, and a working understanding of modern technology and law and finance. His body is frail. His physical strength is essentially non-existent, but his mind is razor-sharp. Burns is arguably the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield, operating with a ruthlessness and effectiveness that nobody else in the show comes close to matching. And he has been operating at that level for longer than any human being in documented history has maintained sustained consciousness. The show addresses this directly, in the same episode that becomes relevant to so many of Springfield's mysteries, the Springfield Files. During this episode, we learn that Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment whose intensity and chemical complexity is so extreme that it causes his body to emit visible light afterward. A healthy green glow, the kind of light you might more naturally associate with a radioactive material than with human tissue. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 days. Without the next dose, he dies. His survival is maintained on a weekly schedule with zero margin for error. His life is not sustained by biological processes operating normally. It is maintained the way you maintain a machine, through scheduled intervention, administered at precise intervals, designed to hold a system in a state of artificial stability that it would not achieve or maintain on its own. And the treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to keep his own biological systems functioning. Burns isn't just profiting from radiation. He is, in the most literal sense, powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by a lifetime of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer operate on normal cellular chemistry. It requires external radiation input the way a healthy body requires food and water. Withhold it and the system shuts down within a week. This changes everything about how you understand Burns's relationship to the power plant. The plant isn't just a business. It isn't just a source of revenue and power and influence, though it is all of those things. The plant is the infrastructure that supports the medical operation that keeps Burns alive. Without the plant, without the revenue it generates, without the scientific resources that revenue funds, Burns's treatment program would eventually fail, and Burns dies within a week of the treatment failing. The power plant is keeping Burns alive, which means every decision Burns makes about the plant, every scheme he runs to maintain his control over it, every effort he makes to keep it operating despite its 342 violations, every choice to keep Homer Simpson in the inspector's chair rather than someone who might actually do something about the safety failures, all of it serves the same ultimate purpose. Keep the plant running. Keep the revenue flowing. Keep the treatments coming. Keep Burns alive. Everything else is downstream of that imperative. Now, consider what the treatments are actually doing, because the show gives you a remarkable amount of information about this through the scene that has become one of the most quoted pieces of dialogue in the series' history. Burns visits a doctor. The doctor examines him and delivers the diagnosis. Burns has every disease known to medical science. Every single illness that has ever been cataloged simultaneously present in his body. Every pathogen, every malignancy, every degenerative condition, all of them coexisting in a single biological system. And yet Burns is functional, because the diseases, all of them present at once, exist in a state of perfect equilibrium. Each condition competing against every other condition for primacy, each one blocked from advancing by the simultaneous presence of everything else. The doctor describes it as Three Stooges syndrome. 3 people trying to fit through a doorway at once and none of them getting through. Burns's diseases are all trying to kill him simultaneously. Because they're all present at once, they create a biological gridlock that prevents any single illness from gaining the upper hand. The doctor's conclusion is that Burns is the sickest man in the United States but is functionally indestructible because everything that should kill him is neutralized by everything else that should kill him. This is played for comedy. It's one of the show's most memorable scenes. But apply the radiation theory and it becomes something else. Burns's body isn't maintaining this disease equilibrium through any natural biological process. The weekly radiation treatments are doing it. They aren't curing his illnesses. They aren't fighting the diseases in any conventional medical sense. What they're doing is managing them, maintaining the delicate balance between competing pathologies that keeps any single one of them from breaking through and taking over. The radiation is functioning as a stabilizing agent, holding Burns's biology in a kind of permanent suspended state, his diseases all frozen in their tracks, his systems neither healthy nor dying, but hovering in a third condition that doesn't have a name because it has never been observed in a normal human being before. Burns's body is a reactor. His weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent a meltdown. Too little, and the reactions accelerate toward catastrophic failure. The right amount and everything holds at a carefully managed equilibrium that keeps the system from breaking down entirely. This is why Smithers's role is so much more significant than the show typically acknowledges. On the surface, Smithers is the devoted assistant, the loyal employee who manages Burns's schedule, anticipates his needs, and executes his directives with an efficiency that no one else in Springfield could match. The show frames their relationship primarily through the lens of Smithers's unrequited emotional attachment to his employer, and that attachment is real and complicated, and the source of some of the series' more poignant character work. But Smithers is also the only person who fully understands how Burns's medical protocol works. He manages the schedule. He ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns's condition with a level of vigilance that goes far beyond professional loyalty. He is, functionally, Burns's life support system in human form. The show has established repeatedly that if Smithers left, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally helpless, though that would be true as well, but physically helpless in a way that has a specific and fatal timeline attached to it. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. And missing a dose means the disease equilibrium collapses. And the equilibrium collapsing means every illness in his body surges forward simultaneously, unopposed, and Burns dies within days. Smithers knows this. He has to know this. Which means the foundation of his devotion to Burns isn't just emotional attachment, though that's part of it. It's the knowledge that leaving would kill his employer. That walking away would make him directly responsible for the death of the man he's devoted his life to. Smithers is trapped by his own indispensability, held in place as securely as Burns is held in place by his dependence on the treatments. They need each other. Burns needs Smithers to keep the schedule that keeps him alive. Smithers needs Burns to remain alive so that Smithers isn't responsible for killing him. It is, in its own strange way, one of the more genuinely codependent relationships in the show's canon. Burns's connection to historical events adds another layer to the immortality question. The show has depicted him with personal memories spanning from the late 1800s through the present. He served in World War II, though his role was morally questionable. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as history but as lived experience, the kind of familiarity that comes from having been there rather than having studied it. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and kept it hidden for decades. This is not a small crime or an incidental biographical detail. This is a man who operated at a level where stealing $1 trillion from the federal government was something he could do and then simply not be caught for half a century, because his wealth and influence created a buffer zone around him that law enforcement couldn't penetrate. The Burns family itself is established as one of the oldest and most consistently powerful dynasties in American history. Their wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. Their control over their fortune has passed through generations in a way that suggests either extraordinary luck or extraordinary measures, or possibly both. They have been wealthy enough and connected enough and persistent enough to maintain their position across a time span that encompasses the founding of the nation, the Civil War, the Industrial Era, the World Wars, the post-war boom, and everything since. Normal generational succession doesn't produce that kind of continuity. Fortunes divide through inheritance. Power disperses across family branches. The historical record is full of dynasties that burned bright for 2 or 3 generations and then fragmented. The Burns family hasn't fragmented. They've persisted. And the question the show doesn't ask but implies is whether the current Burns' longevity, achieved through medical intervention and radiation dependency, is actually the latest iteration of something the Burns family has always done. Whether previous Burns patriarchs, before nuclear technology was available, found other ways to extend their hold on power and on life. The show doesn't say, but the pattern it establishes suggests that Burns isn't an anomaly within his own lineage. He might be the most extreme expression of something the family has always understood, that money can extend life, and that extending life extends control, and that control extended across generations accumulates into something that ordinary human institutions cannot effectively challenge. Burns's relationship with death is worth examining directly because the show has put him in proximity to fatal outcomes more frequently than almost any other character, and he has come through every single time. He's been shot by Maggie Simpson. He's been hospitalized dozens of times. He's collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been poisoned, been abandoned in wilderness. He's faced situations that should, by any reasonable calculation, have ended him. But each time, he comes back. And the mechanism of his return is always the same. Not resilience, not luck, infrastructure, money, the machinery of wealth that ensures that no matter what happens to his body, there is always someone standing by with the resources to intervene. Always a physician, always a treatment, always another round of whatever the weekly protocol requires to stabilize him and buy another 7 days. Homer survives things because the show needs him to. Burns survives things because he has spent over a century building a system specifically designed to keep him alive regardless of what happens to his physical form. Homer's survival is passive, a consequence of his role in the story. Burns's survival is engineered, the result of deliberate, long-term planning that began before most of the show's characters were born. And here is what makes the Burns immortality theory genuinely unsettling. Beyond the specific details of radiation and disease equilibrium and weekly treatments, Springfield needs Burns to stay alive. The town's economy is built around the power plant. The power plant is Burns's. Take Burns away and the succession is unclear. The plant might close. The town's primary employer and primary energy source disappears. The economic and practical consequences of Burns's death would fall primarily on the people who have spent decades suffering the health consequences of his plant's negligence. Springfield can't afford to kill Burns because Springfield can't survive without him. And Burns can't die because dying would mean the system he spent his life building would finally have to answer for what it's done to the people living inside it. It's not immortality. It's something more practical and more troubling than immortality. It's an arrangement between a man and a town where each party needs the other to keep going, and both parties understand this, and the understanding keeps both of them locked in place, Burns at the top and Springfield underneath him, indefinitely. Burns is not the oldest man in Springfield because death forgot him. He is the oldest man in Springfield because he built a system so thoroughly that dying ceased to be a viable option, too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill, in health and in silence and in fog, for as long as the treatments hold. Section 6. Maggie's secret. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. In that time, without saying a meaningful word, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a rebellion against a tyrannical daycare operator. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations, using strategies that shouldn't be available to someone who can't reliably walk in a straight line. She has demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceed those of adults many times her age. She was tested and found to possess intelligence that shouldn't exist in a child who hasn't yet learned to form sentences. And through all of it, through every remarkable thing she has ever done, she has maintained her silence. Not because she can't speak. The show has established that she can. Because she chooses not to. Let's talk about what that choice actually means. Maggie's first word is one of the show's most famous moments. It was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in a cameo, a brief appearance that carried enormous celebrity weight at the time of broadcast. Homer is about to leave for work. Maggie is in her high chair. She watches him go, and she says, clearly and distinctly, the word daddy. It happens once, and then it never happens again. 36 years of subsequent episodes, and Maggie has not meaningfully spoken since. She communicates through pacifier sounds, through expressively deployed stares, through gestures that the family around her consistently fails to notice or respond to. She lives in a household of extremely verbal people who fill the air with constant noise, and she sits in the middle of it in silence, watching. The theory that Maggie's silence is strategic rather than developmental begins with a simple observation about what happens to intelligent women in the Simpson family. Look at Lisa. Lisa Simpson is a genius. By the show's own repeated establishment, her IQ is remarkable, her capabilities extraordinary, her understanding of the world around her far in excess of what any 8-year-old should possess. She is the most intellectually capable member of her family and probably of most people she encounters in Springfield. She is also, by some measures, the least heard. Lisa speaks up, she gets ignored. She challenges authority, she gets dismissed. She argues for causes that are clearly correct and watches them fail because nobody around her has the patience or the attention span to engage with what she's saying. She wears her intelligence on the outside, announces herself as the smartest person in the room, and the room's consistent response is to make her feel how little that matters in Springfield's particular social and intellectual environment. Lisa's intelligence is her greatest gift and her greatest burden simultaneously, because she uses it visibly, and the world around her doesn't reward visibility. It doesn't reward correctness. It doesn't reward the persistent, patient effort to make a community understand something it doesn't want to understand. Maggie has been watching this happen since the day she was born. She has been watching her sister fight every day for recognition and receive, at best, conditional acknowledgement. She has been watching the most capable person in the family be consistently sidelined by a household and a community that prefers comfort to challenge. She has been a silent, attentive audience for the lesson that Springfield teaches its most intelligent inhabitants. The lesson that ability without strategic deployment is just exposure, and exposure in Springfield's environment is dangerous. And Maggie has drawn a different conclusion than Lisa drew. Lisa's conclusion was that you keep fighting regardless of the cost, that the truth and the cause are worth the friction, that raising your voice is its own kind of victory even when nothing changes as a result. It's a brave conclusion. It's arguably the most admirable stance a character in Springfield can take, and it has cost Lisa an enormous amount. In isolation, in frustration, in the accumulated weight of being consistently right in a community that doesn't want to be corrected. Maggie's conclusion is the opposite. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can actually accomplish. Think about the shooting. The investigation that followed Mr. Burns' injury focused its attention on every adult suspect in Springfield. Homer was arrested. Multiple characters were questioned. The investigators worked methodically through the cast of plausible guilty parties, and Maggie was almost entirely overlooked until Burns himself identified her, because she was a baby, and babies are not suspects, and the investigation was not structured to consider a 1-year-old as a potential perpetrator. The greatest crime in Springfield's history was committed by the one person nobody was watching. Think about The Longest Daycare, the theatrical short film that stands as the most concentrated display of Maggie's capabilities. The premise places her in a daycare facility run with authoritarian precision. A caterpillar is threatened by another baby. Maggie decides to protect it. What follows is 7 minutes of Maggie outmaneuvering the facility's staff, its security systems, and the other baby, using strategies that require multi-step planning, adaptive problem-solving, spatial reasoning, and the ability to model and predict other people's behavior. She does all of this while being limited to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. She falls, she stumbles, her body can barely keep up with what her mind is directing it to do. But every decision she makes is correct. Every strategy she employs is optimized. She is executing an intelligence that her physical form simply hasn't caught up to yet. And she succeeds because the gap between her mental capability and her apparent developmental stage is so large that nobody is prepared to account for it. Her cognitive ability compensates for every physical limitation her body imposes. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly on several occasions. The results are consistent in their implication, if not in their specific numbers. Maggie is not a normal baby. Her intelligence registers as extraordinary, off the charts, beyond what standardized instruments can reliably measure. The show deploys this revelation for a quick laugh and moves on. But the pattern underneath those laugh lines is unmistakable. Maggie consistently demonstrates cognitive abilities that no 1-year-old should possess. And the family, who is nominally attentive to the extraordinary, consistently fails to notice because they are occupied with Homer's disasters and Bart's pranks and Lisa's crusades, and the baby in the background is just the baby in the background. That's exactly what Maggie has engineered. Her defining characteristic is not her intelligence, though her intelligence is remarkable. Her defining characteristic is her silence, and her silence is the mechanism through which her intelligence remains operational and undetected. She has spent 36 years doing the most effective thing you can do in an environment that punishes visible intelligence. She has made herself invisible. She is surrounded by a family that communicates at high volume and high speed, and she has found the space between the words, the gap in the noise, the unmonitored margin where observation and planning can happen without triggering the kind of response that Lisa's visible intelligence consistently triggers. She is, in the most literal sense, hiding in plain sight. She is doing it in a high chair in the middle of the living room. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations, and if those mutations affect individuals differently based on their specific biology and exposure patterns, then the Simpson children represent a remarkable range of outcomes from the same environmental cause. Bart's mutations manifest primarily in his physical characteristics and his particular brand of chaotic energy. Lisa's manifest in intellectual gifts that, while significant, are clearly recognizable as a form of human intelligence, even if an unusually capable one. But Maggie, if Homer's mutation reduced his cognitive capacity to the level of a clinical disability, processing the radiation's effects in the direction of diminishment, then Maggie represents the opposite end of the same spectrum. The same environmental exposure, the same family genetics, the same contaminated water and air and proximity to the plant's influence. But where the father's brain was diminished, the daughter's was amplified in ways that don't follow any normal developmental curve. Homer and Maggie are the two extremes of what the power plant's influence can produce. He is the floor. She is the ceiling. And the gap between them is a gap so large that they barely seem to exist in the same cognitive universe, which in a sense they don't, because Homer is largely unaware that the universe contains what Maggie is. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on an almost unbearable emotional weight. If Homer is dreaming, then Maggie's brilliance is Homer's deepest hope for his youngest child, projected onto the dream with all the intensity of a father's love and terror. He can't see her grow. He can't watch her develop into who she'll become. He can't hear her speak in complete sentences or watch her first steps or be there for the 10,000 small moments that accumulate into knowing a person. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age and her apparent limitations. He makes her capable of things no actual baby could do, because in his coma, Homer needs to believe that Maggie will be okay even without him there. Her genius isn't a mutation in this reading, it's a father's prayer. But there's a darker version of Maggie's silence that exists independently of both the radiation theory and the coma theory, a version grounded simply in what Maggie has observed and what she has concluded from her observations. She watches everything, she remembers everything, she understands everything, and she is waiting. The show never tells us what she's waiting for. That's the last truly open mystery in the Simpson family. Every other character's arc has been traced across dozens of episodes. We know Homer's history, his damage, his loves, his failures. We know Marge's patience and where it comes from. We know Bart's restlessness and Lisa's loneliness and what drives them forward. But Maggie's interior life remains sealed behind those enormous, watching eyes and that perpetually moving pacifier. We've seen glimpses. We've seen her shoot a man. We've seen her command a room full of babies. We've seen her execute complex plans under pressure. We've seen her nod to confirm or deny something an adult is wondering, as if she's been following the conversation all along and simply waiting for the right moment to contribute. And the family trusts her judgment implicitly when they bother to notice her at all. She is 1 year old. She cannot walk without assistance. She cannot speak, and she may be the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She just hasn't decided what to do about it. That might be the thing about Maggie that takes longest to settle. Not what she's done, but what she's waiting to do. Behind the pacifier, behind the enormous eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate silence, something is thinking and planning and watching the world with a quality of attention that nobody suspects and nobody is prepared to contain. And when Maggie finally decides to act, when the moment she's been calculating arrives and she moves from observation to intention, Springfield won't see it coming. That's exactly how she designed it. Section 7. Mona Simpson and the Conspiracy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him his mother had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned in the way Homer mourns things, incompletely and often at the wrong moments, but genuinely. He grew up with the understanding that his mother was gone, that the maternal love that shapes a person's early years had been taken from him before he was old enough to carry real memories of it. This belief shaped Homer in ways the show rarely articulates directly but builds into everything about him. His desperate need for approval, his clinginess toward Marge, the way he holds onto her love with both hands as if he's afraid it might be taken away, the way everything good in his life eventually gets taken away. His willingness to endure humiliation and indignity from his employer, from his neighbors, from the town at large, rather than risk the one stable thing he has managed to build around himself. His compulsive need to be liked, even by people who don't like him, even by people whose opinions shouldn't matter, because somewhere underneath all the comedy, Homer is a man who has been trying to fill a specific absence for his entire life. Homer Simpson's personality is a coping mechanism for maternal loss. He became who he is because his mother wasn't there. And in season 7, the show revealed that she wasn't dead. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired in November of 1995 and is considered by many critics and longtime fans to be one of the series' greatest achievements, a piece of genuine emotional television that the comedy format makes possible rather than impeding. Here's what happens. Homer, in the process of faking his own death to avoid working on a Saturday, discovers through municipal records that his mother's death was never officially registered, because she never died. The grave Abe showed him wasn't his mother's. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been directing his son to visit a famous writer's burial site as a proxy for his wife's for the entirety of Homer's life. Homer's mother is alive. She has been alive this whole time. He finds her at a cemetery, visiting what she believes to be her son's grave, not knowing that Homer is the man standing in front of her. She doesn't recognize him at first. He's changed. He's grown into someone she never had the chance to see become. But when Homer proves who he is, they have the reunion that the entire premise of the episode has been building toward. A grown man and his mother, separated by almost 30 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells him why she left. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was an ordinary woman, married, young, a mother to a small boy named Homer, living in Springfield while the world outside went through convulsions, the civil rights movement, the counterculture, Vietnam, the particular burning urgency of a decade that felt like history being made in real time. She watched it happen from Springfield, and something in what she watched changed her. She joined a group of activists. The show's shorthand is hippies, but the shorthand doesn't quite contain what the show actually depicts. These were people with a specific target and a specific cause. They had discovered that Mr. Burns was operating a biological weapons laboratory in Springfield, not a nuclear facility, not a power plant, a germ warfare lab. a facility specifically designed to produce biological weapons in the same community where families were raising children and drinking the water and going about their lives without any awareness that the richest man in town was synthesizing weaponizable pathogens in a building nearby. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show calls an antibiotic bomb, a device designed to destroy the biological agents stored inside. The raid worked. The germs were destroyed. During the chaos of the operation, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, who would go on to become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded. But Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had fallen in the confusion. That someone was Mr. Burns. She stopped to help him, an act of reflexive human decency towards someone who appeared to need it. And Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She couldn't go home. She couldn't contact Abe, couldn't hold Homer, couldn't explain anything because explaining anything would have led the federal authorities straight to her family and put them in danger. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping. She disappeared into the night. And Homer woke up, and she was gone, and Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life believing the lie. Now, here is where the conspiracy acquires its shape and its weight. Burns didn't just identify Mona to the FBI, he actively pursued her. He maintained a personal grudge against a woman who had destroyed his biological weapons program, and he used his resources and connections to ensure that she could never safely surface. When Mona returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns spots her almost immediately, recognizes her through a window, and calls the authorities. She has to flee again. Homer says goodbye to his mother for the second time, and this time he knows why she's leaving and who forced her to go. He knows that the man who destroyed his family is his employer. Homer works for Burns. He has worked for Burns his entire adult life. He earns his paycheck from the man who drove his mother into exile when Homer was 6 years old. He has spent decades dependent on the income generated by the facility owned by the person who stole his childhood. And Homer doesn't connect the dots. He doesn't confront Burns. He doesn't quit. He doesn't even seem to fully process the direct line between Burns had my mother declared a fugitive and Burns signs my checks. The connection is there. It is not subtle. It would not require significant analytical capacity to make it, but Homer doesn't make it. And the radiation theory offers an answer to why. Homer's brain, already reduced to an IQ of 55, by the combination of childhood crayon incident and decades of environmental exposure to whatever the plant has been releasing, doesn't process causal chains with the reliability that a normally functioning brain would. He can feel the weight of what happened to his family. He carries it. You can see it in the way the show handles his relationship with his mother, the rawness underneath the comedy. But connecting the biographical facts into an actionable understanding of who is responsible for what is a cognitive operation that is, for Homer, simply out of reach. Burns engineered this. Or more precisely, Burns did something to Mona in 1969 that had consequences across 3 generations of Simpsons, and those consequences have served Burns's interests in ways that might or might not have been fully calculated at the time, but have operated with the consistency of something deliberately designed. By driving Mona away when Homer was 6, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up without his mother's influence, without whatever Mona might have taught him about questioning authority, about fighting for what's right, about the particular courage that led her to destroy a biological weapons lab in the middle of the night. Homer without Mona became someone very specific, emotionally damaged, desperate for approval, constitutionally unable to challenge authority because authority is connected in his psyche to the possibility of abandonment, and abandonment is the thing Homer cannot survive. The perfect employee for a man who needs someone in the safety inspector chair who will never actually inspect anything. The show confirms the structural version of this arrangement through a revelation in a later season. Burns committed a crime. Grandpa Simpson discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns made a guarantee. Homer would always have a job at the plant. No matter what he did, no matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how egregiously he failed at every aspect of his stated responsibilities, Homer would keep his position. 742 documented errors, and not a single permanent termination. Homer's job security wasn't cartoon convenience. It was a contractual obligation between his father and his mother's persecutor, brokered in silence, maintained across decades, never explained to Homer, because explaining it would require explaining everything else. The deal itself is worth sitting with. Abe discovered that Burns had committed a crime. Abe had leverage. He could have used that leverage to expose Burns, to challenge the man who had destroyed his family, to create some form of accountability for what had been done to Mona. Instead, Abe traded the leverage for his son's job security. He made a deal with the enemy. He secured Homer's future by ensuring that Homer would spend that future working for the man who took everything from them. It's not a heroic choice, but it might be an understandable one. Abe was an old man dealing with consequences that had already played out. Mona was gone. The damage was done. What he had was leverage, and what Homer needed was stability, and Abe made the transaction that kept Homer housed and fed and employed, even if the employer was the source of everything that had gone wrong. Homer never knew about the deal. Homer has never known the full architecture of the life he's been living inside. 3 generations of one family, each one shaped by the actions of a single man who wanted his biological weapons program left intact, who held a grudge against a woman who had the courage to destroy it, and who used his resources and his patience and his extraordinary lifespan to ensure that the consequences of that grudge echoed forward across decades, touching everyone connected to Mona Simpson in ways they couldn't trace and couldn't fight because they didn't know where they were coming from. Homer chose to put the crayon back in. He chose the fog over the clarity. But the choice was rigged before it was offered. The conditions that made clarity unbearable, the damaged brain, the radiation exposure, the specific shape of Springfield's environment, and what it does to the people who live in it, those conditions were produced by decades of Burns's influence on the town. Homer didn't just stumble into an impaired life. He was led to the edge of it and gently pushed. And Burns won. Burns always wins. In Springfield, the man with enough money and enough time writes the rules. And the rules say that Homer Simpson works at the power plant, and Mona Simpson lives as a fugitive, and Abe Simpson carries his silence to his grave, and the family at the center of this whole story keeps absorbing consequences they can't explain and wouldn't believe if they could. Mona came back one more time, in a later season, and she died. Homer sat beside her. He held her hand. He watched her go for the last time, without a joke, without a cutaway, without the reset that usually follows anything painful in Springfield. Just a man and his mother and 30 years of absence pressing down on both of them in a hospital room. The show is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the jokes, underneath all of it, there is this. A family that was systematically broken by one man's pettiness, his refusal to let a raid on his germ warfare lab go unanswered, his decision to spend decades making sure the woman who embarrassed him could never come home. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the person who destroyed his family. Homer inherited the consequences and lived inside them without ever quite understanding where they came from. And Burns, who owned the biological weapons lab and who had the woman who destroyed it chased across the country for 30 years, who corrupted Homer's grandfather and employed Homer's brain-damaged father and never once faced meaningful consequence for any of it. Burns is still in his mansion on the hill, still being kept alive by the treatments, still the richest man in Springfield, still watching the cooling towers leak from his office window while the residents of the town he essentially owns go about their days in the soft, persistent fog that has been their atmosphere since before most of them were born. Burns didn't just take Homer's mother. He took Homer's potential. The man Homer might have been, the one who emerges briefly when the crayon is removed, exists. He's in there. He always has been. But he was never meant to reach the surface. Not in Springfield. Not in a town calibrated to the specific level of impairment that keeps its residents grateful and compliant, and unable to look up at the cracked cooling towers and ask the one question that would change everything. Why are we all like this? Section 8. The Simpsons Predictions. Let's talk about the phenomenon that has made The Simpsons more famous in the 2020s than it was during the decade generally considered its peak creative period. The predictions. The idea that a cartoon from 1989 has been accurately forecasting the future for 36 years with an uncanny regularity that has generated thousands of social media posts, countless news articles, and genuine bewilderment among people who haven't thought carefully about how probability and cultural memory actually work. The biggest ones are probably familiar to you. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future version of America in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president. In that episode, the context makes clear that Lisa's predecessor in the White House was Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. In a 1995 episode, the show depicted a wristband device that functions remarkably like what a modern smartwatch does. In a 1998 episode, Homer discovers a mathematical equation that corresponds closely to an expression that would later appear in a description of the Higgs boson particle's mass, a particle that wasn't experimentally confirmed until 2012. In a 1999 episode, Homer proposes a theory about the universe being shaped like a donut, a torus, and years later, radiation pattern data suggested that the universe's topology might actually be toroidal. In a 1993 episode, a flu virus originating in Asia spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic, shortages, and a frantic response that maps uncomfortably well onto events that happened globally in 2020. And then there's the 1996 episode where the show made a joke about Cypress Hill performing with the London Symphony Orchestra. In 2024, exactly that happened. Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years after the joke. The list is long. It gets cited constantly. Every time a new apparent hit emerges, the cultural response is predictable. Screenshots, sharing, the refrain that The Simpsons did it first, the half-joking and half-serious suggestion that the show's writers are somehow accessing information about the future that the rest of us don't have. The actual answer to how this works is considerably less mysterious than the mythology suggests, and significantly more interesting. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on the show through a substantial portion of its run, has addressed the prediction phenomenon directly. His explanation is simple. If you throw enough darts at a large enough target for long enough, some of them are going to hit something that looks like a bullseye in retrospect. That's it. That's the mechanism. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes across 36 years. Each episode contains multiple jokes, references, satirical observations, predictions, and extrapolations. The total volume of specific claims and depicted scenarios that the show has generated across that period is enormous. Statistically, some percentage of them are going to correspond to future events purely through the operation of probability. Bill Oakley, who served as a showrunner during what many consider the series' peak years, put it more plainly still. Most of the supposed predictions are coincidences produced by the show's enormous output and the cyclical nature of history. Things repeat. Patterns recur. What looks like prophecy from the inside is often just pattern recognition from outside, applied retrospectively to a dataset large enough to contain whatever patterns you're looking for. The fact-checking community has spent considerable effort examining the most prominent alleged predictions and has found that the majority of them have more mundane explanations than the cultural mythology suggests. Take the Trump prediction. The show didn't pluck Donald Trump's name out of nowhere and imagine him as a future president through some process of political clairvoyance. Trump had been publicly discussing running for the presidency since the late 1980s, floating the idea in interviews, testing the concept in public discourse, making himself available as a reference point for the idea of celebrity as political candidate years before the episode aired. The writers didn't predict Trump would become president. They observed that he had been positioning himself for that possibility for over a decade and wrote a joke about the logical absurdity of where that trajectory was heading. They were reading the present carefully and extending it forward, not accessing the future. The Disney-Fox merger prediction works the same way. Media consolidation was an accelerating, documented trend well before the episode that depicted it. The writers looked at the direction of corporate entertainment and wrote a gag about a large company eventually swallowing a competitor. They weren't prophesying a specific deal. They were satirizing a general tendency that was already in motion and would eventually produce specific instances of itself. The smartwatch prediction comes from a simpler place still. The writers observed that consumer technology was getting smaller, more portable, and more personal. They imagined the logical endpoint of a trend that was already visible. The specific form their imagination took turned out to be remarkably close to what actually happened. But the specific form was the obvious extrapolation of an existing direction rather than a magical leap forward. And the writing staff of The Simpsons is not a collection of ordinary people making intuitive guesses. The show has historically been staffed by some of the most highly educated writers in American television. Multiple people on the writing team at various points have held degrees from Harvard, Yale, and comparable institutions. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, science, computer science, and political analysis. These are people who read extensively, think analytically, and spend their professional lives studying American culture and extrapolating its trajectories. They're not predicting the future. They're reading the present more carefully than most people read it, and pushing the conclusions a few steps further down the road. But here's where the prediction phenomenon gets genuinely interesting, and where the simple statistical explanation starts to feel like it's missing something. Because while the debunking accounts for most of the predictions cleanly, it doesn't account for all of them with equal comfort. Some of the correspondences are specific enough and precise enough that statistical coincidence plus confirmation bias starts to feel like it's doing a lot of work. The Trump prediction didn't just forecast a celebrity running for president. It specified Trump by name. The show depicted him in a way that corresponded to specific visual elements of his eventual real-world campaign announcement. The Siegfried and Roy episode didn't just joke about performers with big cats. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a specific way that corresponded closely to what actually happened to Roy Horn in 2003. These aren't vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details that align with specific future events in ways that go beyond the base rate one would expect from high-volume satirical content. And this is where the more interesting theory comes in. The one that's more productive than any conspiracy about time-traveling writers or prophetic texts. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. The mechanism here is cultural influence, not prophecy. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced, and most deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its jokes have entered the language. Its observations have become part of the vocabulary through which Americans understand and discuss their own culture. The show isn't just reflecting American life. It is, in a meaningful sense, one of the primary texts through which American life understands itself. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke doesn't stay in the episode. It enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes part of how people think and talk about the possibility of a Trump presidency, part of the way the idea circulates in public consciousness before it becomes a reality. The joke doesn't predict the event. The joke makes the event feel familiar in advance. It primes the cultural imagination, makes the idea seem like something we've already processed, already thought about, already filed away somewhere in the category of things we've seen before. And when the reality arrives, it doesn't feel shocking. It feels like recognition. We've seen this. The Simpsons did this. We were prepared. The show made media consolidation feel inevitable by depicting it as satire years before it happened. When the consolidation actually occurred, the cultural response wasn't surprise. It was the sense of having been told. The show didn't predict it. The show normalized it so thoroughly that when it happened, it felt like the natural completion of something that had already been set in motion. Springfield doesn't reflect America. The longer the show runs, the more the relationship inverts. America has been staring at Springfield for so long that we have started to resemble what we see. The nuclear plant, the corrupt billionaire, the incompetent but fundamentally well-meaning bureaucracy, the population too distracted to fully notice how comprehensively they're being managed by systems they didn't design and don't control. The cycle of catastrophe and reset, the collective amnesia, these things are in Springfield because they were already in America. But they've been in Springfield long enough and consistently enough that America's image of itself has incorporated them. The show didn't diagnose where America was heading. The show diagnosed where America already was. And then it kept showing it to us, week after week, for 36 years, until we absorbed it. And here is the final piece that makes the whole phenomenon genuinely worth sitting with. The Simpsons has made jokes that didn't come true. Thousands of them. Jokes about technology that never materialized. Predictions about cultural directions that went a different way. Satirical observations about political trajectories that didn't follow the expected arc. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody shares them. Nobody builds articles and social media threads around the predictions that failed. Confirmation bias is not a neutral force. It is an active filter, selecting for the hits and erasing the misses from the record. You remember the prediction that corresponded to something that happened. You don't remember the 12 predictions from the same episode that corresponded to nothing. And across 800 episodes, the hits accumulate into a highlight reel that looks, filtered through that selective memory, like prophecy. The predictions aren't supernatural. They're the natural result of a brilliant, long-running show staffed by highly educated observers of American culture, producing more satirical content than any other program in television history, filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever constructed, which is the collective memory of a globally connected internet audience that remembers what confirms its existing sense of the world and forgets what doesn't. But try explaining that to the comment section next time a 1997 clip lines up with a 2025 headline. Because here's the thing. Even understanding exactly how the trick works, even having the full explanation clearly in mind, the next time it happens you'll feel the same involuntary chill. The same sense of having been told something before it happened. The same feeling that this particular show, this particular collection of writers and producers and voice actors, knew something about the shape of the future that they shouldn't have been able to know. And that feeling is real, even if what it's detecting isn't prophecy. What it's detecting is the quality of attention that the show has paid to American life for over 3 decades, the consistency and the intelligence of that attention, the accumulated weight of a show that has been watching us more carefully than we've been watching it. The Simpsons wrote enough possible futures that some of them had to come true, and the ones that came true are the only ones anyone remembers, which is, in its way, the most human thing about the whole phenomenon. Section 9. The Principal Who Wasn't. Season 9, Episode 2. The 28th of September, 1997. The episode that the show's fanbase has never forgiven, and possibly the most important episode The Simpsons ever produced. It's called The Principal and the Pauper, and almost everyone who has written about it has gotten it wrong. Here's the setup. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. The town gathers. The celebration is in full swing. And then a stranger walks through the door, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and presumed dead. He survived. He came home. And he found that someone else had been living his life for 20 years. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is not Seymour Skinner. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street punk from nowhere, a petty criminal with no future and no particular direction, drafted into the army and placed in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to the man's mother, Agnes. When Agnes assumed he was her son, when she needed him to be her son, Tamzarian made a decision that would define the next 20 years of his life. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the mother, the entire identity. He stepped into a stolen life and lived inside it until the real owner came back to claim it. And then the real Skinner walks in. The charade collapses. Every person in Springfield now knows that their principal is an imposter, that the man who has been running their school and raising his mother's expectations and participating in their community for 2 decades is not who he has always said he was. And here is what Springfield does with this information. The town holds a meeting. Both men are present. The truth is fully exposed and fully acknowledged. And then Springfield votes, not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on whether to restore the real Skinner's identity and the life that was taken from him. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They choose the lie. Judge Snyder issues a formal legal decree. Armin Tamzarian is henceforth the legal Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the real one, the war hero who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his name, had been borrowed and his mother had been replaced, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever speak of this matter again, under penalty that the show describes in terms of official punishment. A community voted to make truth illegal and exile the person who embodied it. Fans despise this episode. The backlash was fierce and has never entirely subsided. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner among other characters, publicly expressed his displeasure with the storyline. Critics argued that the episode retroactively undermined everything the show had established about Skinner's character, that his backstory, his relationship with Agnes, his dynamic with Bart, his entire personality had been built on a fiction, and the episode had destroyed the integrity of a character the audience had known for almost a decade. The episode sits consistently near the bottom of ranked lists of Simpsons episodes. It's cited as the moment the show stopped caring about its own continuity, the moment it betrayed the audience's investment in the characters. But here's the reading that almost nobody has offered. The episode is completely honest. It's just honest about something the audience didn't want to see articulated clearly. The principal and the pauper isn't an anomaly. It's a revelation. It takes the mechanism that has been operating in Springfield throughout the entire run of the show and makes it visible. It shows you the machinery behind the town's extraordinary capacity for collective forgetting, and it does so with the kind of directness that makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't have the decency to hide what it's showing. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfort over accuracy, familiar fiction over documented truth, the agreed-upon version of events over the version that actually happened. The only thing unusual about this episode is that it shows you the process. It shows you the vote. It shows you the legal decree. It shows you the moment of explicit collective choice, the point at which the community actively, consciously, formally decides that the truth is less important than the story they've already built their lives around. Every other time Springfield forgets something catastrophic, it happens between episodes, quietly, without ceremony, with no visible mechanism. The audience accepts it as a production convention, a narrative reset, and moves on. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show lets you watch the reset happen in real time, with witnesses, with paperwork, with a man being tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from a community that couldn't afford to keep him. Consider how many things Springfield has experienced that should have permanently altered it. The town has been sealed under a dome by the federal government. It's survived near nuclear disasters. It's been invaded. It's experienced events that in any realistic framework would require extended processing, institutional response, lasting changes to how the community understands itself. And by the following episode, everything is back to normal. The dome doesn't come up. The near disaster isn't referenced. The invasion is forgotten. The slate is clean. The coma theory calls this a dreaming brain resetting between cycles. The radiation theory calls it neurological damage from chronic environmental contamination. Both explanations treat the forgetting as a consequence of something happening to the residents, something done to them that impairs their capacity to hold memory. But the Principal and the Pauper offers a third explanation. Springfield resets because Springfield chooses to reset. The community makes a collective, deliberate decision to not acknowledge what happened, to maintain the agreed-upon version of reality, and to treat any deviation from that version as a threat to be suppressed. The forgetting isn't a symptom. It's a policy. And it's a policy that makes a terrible kind of sense if you understand what it would cost Springfield to actually remember. If the town remembered the dome, it would have to acknowledge the contamination. Acknowledging the contamination would mean confronting the power plant. Confronting the power plant would mean challenging Burns. Challenging Burns would destabilize the economy. Destabilizing the economy would, in the most plausible outcomes, destroy the town. So the town doesn't remember the dome. If the town acknowledged that their principal had been living a stolen identity for 20 years, it would have to reckon with the question of how many other things in Springfield's official narrative were similarly constructed. If one foundational figure in the community turns out to be someone else, what about the others? What about all the comfortable stories the town has been telling itself about itself? One thread pulled, and the whole fabric becomes suspect. So the town doesn't acknowledge Tamzarian. It acknowledges Skinner and makes acknowledging Tamzarian illegal. The real Seymour Skinner is Springfield's most expensive truth. He is proof that the official narrative was always a fiction. He is the walking, talking, decorated veteran embodiment of the question Springfield cannot afford to have asked. And so he gets expelled, tied to a railroad car and sent somewhere else, out of sight, his existence made legally unspeakable. The community closing ranks behind him. He is not the last person this happens to. He is just the one you got to watch it happen to in real time. Now take the same episode and run it through the coma theory. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since 1993 is the product of an unconscious mind trying to hold its world together, then this episode represents something that the dream is working through without fully understanding what it's processing. Homer's unconscious mind invents a scenario in which an entire community votes to sustain a fiction, because that's what Homer needs to believe is possible. He needs to believe that stolen identities can become real through consensus. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can stand in for the real one if enough people agree to treat it as legitimate. Because that's exactly what Homer's coma is, a simulation. a dream standing in for waking life. A version of reality that runs on Homer's desire and memory and love rather than actual time passing in the actual world. And as long as nobody in the dream challenges the fiction, as long as the town votes to maintain it, as long as the legal decree holds, Homer doesn't have to wake up. The Principal and the Pauper is the dream defending itself from the inside. Springfield voting to exile truth because truth, in this context, is the thing that ends the dream. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And the real Seymour Skinner is out there somewhere, tied to a railroad car, the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. The episode fans thought broke. The Simpsons was actually the only episode that told you exactly how Springfield works and has always worked. It just did it without the protective distance of metaphor, and the audience, having spent years comfortable with the comfortable version of the show, didn't want to see it laid that bare. That's Springfield. That's always been Springfield. The episode just forgot to hide it. Section 10. Ned Flanders, Hans Moleman, and the weight of it all. There are two characters in Springfield who exist at the extreme ends of what the town's environment produces, and they represent between them something essential about how the show actually works underneath the comedy. Hans Moleman and Ned Flanders. One of them is the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. The other may be the saddest man in a show full of people with reasons to be sad. And together they illuminate something about Springfield's relationship with suffering that the show has been exploring for 36 years without quite naming directly. Let's start with Hans Moleman, because his story is in some ways simpler even if its implications are not. Moleman is a tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who has existed in Springfield's background since the show's early seasons. He appears most reliably in the following contexts: about to be harmed, in the process of being harmed, or in the immediate aftermath of having been harmed. He gets hit by cars. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets buried alive. He gets struck by lightning. He walks into traffic and disappears beneath vehicles. He is eaten by animals. He is incinerated in at least one episode. By a conservative count, Hans Moleman has died on camera more times than any other character in the history of the series, and this includes the special Halloween episodes that are specifically designated as spaces where normal rules don't apply. His deaths happen in regular, canonical episodes. He dies, and then 2 episodes later he appears in the background at the Quickie Mart, perfectly intact, with no explanation offered or apparently required. Most people process this as a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. It's dark, it's funny. The pattern is part of the show's texture. Don't think about it. But under the radiation theory, Moleman's repeated deaths become something much stranger. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations in its residents, and if those mutations affect each individual differently, then Moleman might represent the most extreme biological mutation in the town. A man whose cellular biology has been so thoroughly altered by nuclear exposure that his body can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. He doesn't survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer endures damage and heals from it through accelerated recovery. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function, and then it comes back. Death in Springfield, under this reading, may be a temporary condition for certain residents whose biology has been altered in specific ways. A biological reset. A cellular reassembly process triggered by whatever the power plant has done to the fundamental machinery of life for the people who have been absorbing its output for decades. Under the coma theory, Moleman serves a different function. He is a background process in Homer's dream, a minor character that Homer's unconscious mind doesn't have strong enough memories or emotional investment in to maintain consistently. The dream generates Moleman to populate scenes, to provide texture, to keep Springfield feeling inhabited. And when the dream doesn't need him, he lapses. When it needs him again, he reappears. The deaths aren't really deaths in this reading. They're just moments when the background process temporarily halts and then restarts. Under the collective denial theory, Moleman's death cycle is just another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, visibly, with witnesses, regularly, and nobody investigates. Nobody calls for any kind of institutional response. The town has normalized Moleman's death cycle the same way it has normalized the three-eyed fish and the glowing billionaire and the baby who shot someone. They simply proceed as if nothing requires acknowledgement, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging all the other things they've agreed not to acknowledge, and that road leads somewhere the town has collectively decided not to go. And then there's the detail about Molman's age. In one episode, Molman states his age as 31. 31 years old. Look at him. By visual appearance, Hans Moleman is somewhere between 70 and 90. He has the physicality and the apparent biological age of a very old man. He is nearly blind. He moves slowly. He has the particular fragility of advanced age. And he is 31 years old. Something aged him catastrophically. Something took a person who should be at the biological midpoint of a normal human life and produced a body that appears to be at or near the end of one. Something that also, simultaneously, made him nearly indestructible despite his apparent frailty. Something that made death a revolving door for him rather than a final address. The radiation theory has an answer. The coma theory has an answer. The collective denial theory has an answer. The only framework that doesn't explain Molman's situation is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon and none of this means anything. Everything else in the show's accumulated mythology points toward a specific cause, operating in a specific environment, producing specific effects on specific people. And Molman is one of its most visible products, dying and returning in the background of Springfield's life, a recurring reminder that the rules here are different. Now, Ned Flanders. Ned is everything Homer is not. He is kind, he is generous, he is devout, he is physically fit, he is financially responsible, he is genuinely patient with his children. He is a good neighbor in the most active sense of the term, someone who provides concrete help and consistent support to the people around him. He is, by any objective measure, a significantly better person than Homer in nearly every dimension the show makes available for comparison. And the show punishes him for it relentlessly. His wife, Maude, was killed at a NASCAR event when a t-shirt cannon misfired. The specific circumstances of her death are directly connected to Homer's behavior. Homer was dodging the t-shirts, because Homer doesn't want a t-shirt, and they hit Maude instead. Homer's selfishness killed Ned's wife. Ned forgave him, because Ned forgives, because Ned turns the other cheek, because that's what Ned does. His house was destroyed by a hurricane. The community rallied to rebuild it, in the heartwarming way that communities sometimes do. Except the community built it badly, because the community contains Homer, and the house collapsed immediately after completion. The insurance was insufficient. The loss was comprehensive. Ned's response to the accumulation of losses was a psychological breakdown, not the gentle TV-safe kind, but a real one. He snapped. He said things he had been holding inside for years. Specific, pointed, accurate things about every person in Springfield who had failed him, disappointed him, or stood by while something was taken from him. He said all of it in public, and then was committed to a mental health facility. In the facility, something was revealed about Ned that reframes everything. Ned's relentless niceness is not a natural character trait. It is the product of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, who were part of a subculture that didn't believe in traditional discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. What the treatment produced was Ned Flanders as the show presents him. A man who cannot express anger, cannot sustain resentment, cannot respond to provocation with the self-protective reactions that normal people generate automatically. His kindness is a cage built around a feral child by a doctor who treated childhood rage by removing the capacity for rage. Everything about Ned reads differently once you know this. His patience with Homer's consistent disrespect isn't saintly, it's pathological. His brain was wired in childhood to suppress anger responses at the neurological level. He doesn't experience Homer's behavior the way a normal person would experience it and choose to respond with grace. He literally cannot form the sustained anger response that would be the appropriate output for what Homer does to him repeatedly. His faith is not the confident spiritual conviction it presents as. It is the framework of a man who needs an external explanatory system for why he keeps suffering, despite doing everything the system says is the right way to live. He keeps the faith because the faith promises that suffering has meaning. And Ned needs suffering to have meaning, because if it doesn't, if the accumulated weight of what has been taken from him has no significance, then he has to sit with the possibility that his entire life has been a costly experiment in niceness that produced nothing but loss. And then there's the theological dimension. God talks to Homer. This is established canonical fact within the show's universe. Homer and God have had real conversations. God has provided actual guidance, has revealed information, has engaged with Homer as a specific individual whose concerns and questions deserve direct divine response. Homer, who sleeps in church, who regularly violates every principle of organized religion in both letter and spirit, who is by any reasonable assessment among the least observant people in Springfield, has a documented relationship with divine communication. God ignores Ned. Ned, who goes to church every Sunday and actually pays attention, and actually tries to live according to his faith's principles, and actually takes the theological commitments seriously that Homer treats as background noise, has never once received the kind of direct divine communication that Homer gets casually and regularly. The most devout man in Springfield prays into silence. The man who fell asleep during a sermon got to ask God questions and receive specific answers. The show is making a statement here. Not a theological statement about the nature of God, but a structural statement about the nature of Springfield. The system doesn't reward goodness. It rewards compliance. And Ned is the most compliant person in town. He was programmed to be compliant before he was old enough to choose. His compliance is the most total and the most involuntary of any character in the show. His reward is a dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who will never truly appreciate him, and a faith that receives no confirmation from the divine being it is directed toward. Homer is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that doesn't punish wrongness. Ned is what happens when you do everything right in a system that doesn't reward rightness. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. And the gap between them, the gap between doing everything correctly and receiving nothing for it, and doing everything incorrectly and suffering no lasting consequences, has never closed. Because in Springfield, the gap doesn't close. The system isn't designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the power plant, and Ned at the church window, and Burns at the top of the hill, and Moleman somewhere in the middle of the road, and everyone exactly where the arrangement requires them to be. Forever. In a loop that never resolves because resolution would require change, and change would require time, and time in Springfield doesn't work. Ned Flanders is the character who shows you what it costs to be good in a world not organized around goodness. Hans Moleman is the character who shows you what it costs to be ordinary in a world organized around something that has broken the ordinary rules of biology and consequence and death. Together, they frame something the show has been saying quietly for 36 years. Springfield is not a comedy backdrop. It is a specific kind of environment, one in which the rules have been bent in specific directions for specific reasons, and the consequences of those bent rules fall unevenly on the people who live inside them. Some people, the Burns-adjacent ones, the ones with access to treatments and resources and the infrastructure of wealth, navigate the bent rules to their advantage. Others carry the weight of the bending in their bodies and their losses and their silent, obligatory forgiveness. The show is funny. It has always been funny. But underneath the funny, it has always been honest about the weight. Section 11. Where is Springfield? Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can name it than can name the capital of half the actual states in the country. It appears in dictionaries. It has monuments. It has a zip code in the collective imagination of the culture that is somehow more vivid than actual zip codes for actual places. And nobody knows where it is. This is not an accident. This is one of the most deliberate and sophisticated creative decisions the show has ever made, maintained for 36 years with a consistency that has survived network pressures, creator statements, and the internet's relentless appetite for definitive answers. Springfield's geography is not just unknown. It is actively, aggressively, systematically contradicted. The town has oceanfront property and mountain ranges, and deserts, and active volcanoes all within driving distance in various episodes. It borders Ohio in one story, and Nevada in another, and Maine in a third, and Kentucky in something else entirely. Its weather ranges from blizzard conditions to tropical heat waves within the span of a single season. Lisa's telephone area code is 636, which is actually a Missouri prefix. The state abbreviation has been shown as NT, which does not correspond to any real American state. When Homer calls the state capital in one episode, the voice on the other end indicates they're in a state that starts with a vowel, which narrows the field by eliminating some possibilities while keeping dozens of others viable. The show teases answers and snatches them away. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow the geographic possibilities, another clue emerges from a different episode to contradict it completely. This has been happening consistently since the show's earliest seasons, and it has never been resolved, and it will never be resolved, and the not resolving is as much a creative choice as anything else the show has done. Matt Groening, the show's creator, addressed the Springfield location question directly in a 2012 interview. He said he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, the real community near where he grew up. He said he chose the name Springfield because it's one of the most common city names in America, a name that could belong to dozens of actual places across dozens of actual states, which was part of the appeal. The answer seemed definitive. Springfield was in Oregon. It lasted approximately 48 hours before the contradiction machine started back up. Episodes aired after the interview that placed Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers didn't honor Groening's revelation. The show has never honored it, because the mystery isn't a problem to be solved. The mystery is the show's most sophisticated ongoing joke, and the punchline is that there's no answer, and the joke works better the longer the punchline is withheld. The surface-level explanation for this is the one Groening himself has articulated. Springfield is meant to be universal. It's meant to feel like the town you grew up in, regardless of your actual geographic context. It's every American town simultaneously, drawing from the industrial decay of the Rust Belt, and the suburban sprawl of the Sun Belt, and the small-town insularity of New England, and the cultural blankness of the Midwest, all of it layered on top of each other until what you get is a composite that resonates with audiences across the entire country. That's true. That's the intentional design. The writers and Groening have confirmed it repeatedly. But under the theories we've been discussing, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on a character that goes beyond creative intent. If the radiation theory is correct, if the power plant has been warping the biology of Springfield's residents and environment for decades, there's no particular reason to assume the warping stops at the human population. The theory suggests that the contamination has altered the rules of biology within Springfield's boundaries. Why should those alterations be limited to the biological? Why shouldn't the contamination also affect the physical landscape, the geographic relationships between features, the basic spatial logic of a region that has been subject to extraordinary environmental disruption? Springfield has mountains and ocean and desert all accessible within a short drive. No real American location has that combination. But Springfield is not a normal location. It is a location where a cracked nuclear reactor has been leaking into the environment for over 3 decades, where the safety inspector has an IQ of 55, where the fish have 3 eyes, and the sky is a particular shade of yellow, and the cooling towers are held together with chewing gum. Why would the geography be normal when nothing else is? Under the coma theory, Springfield's geographic impossibility has a simpler explanation. It's a dream, and dreams don't have geographic logic, they have emotional logic. Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from fragments of every American place he'd ever seen, visited, or absorbed through television and conversation, layering them on top of each other without regard for the spatial relationships that would govern real geography. Mountains from a vacation, ocean from a commercial, desert from a film he watched, farmland from driving through somewhere once. The mind in sleep doesn't apply the rules that the waking mind uses to organize space. It assembles things by emotional resonance rather than by coordinate. Springfield feels like America because it's made from Homer's memory of America, which is scattered and partial and held together by longing rather than by geographic accuracy, and that's more than enough. Dreams don't need accurate maps. They need emotional truth, and the emotional truth of Springfield's geography is that it contains everything Homer associates with the country he lives in, assembled without the organizational constraints that reality imposes. The legal dimension of Springfield's geographic uncertainty is worth examining directly, because there is a practical consequence to a town whose location in the regulatory system cannot be pinned down. You can't consistently enforce regulations on a facility you can't definitively locate. The EPA can inspect the Springfield power plant in one episode and then be confused about which state the plant is in the next. The nuclear regulatory body has no consistent jurisdiction because jurisdiction requires a fixed address, and Springfield's address keeps changing. You can't hold Burns accountable under Nevada's environmental law and Ohio's environmental law and Maine's environmental law simultaneously because those laws are different and their enforcement mechanisms are different and their regulatory authorities are different. Springfield's floating location isn't just a comedy device. It's functional regulatory ambiguity. A nuclear facility whose state of residence changes depending on which episode you're watching is a nuclear facility that exists in a permanent zone of enforcement uncertainty, and enforcement uncertainty is exactly what a facility with 342 safety violations and human skeletons in the basement requires to continue operating. The town has no fixed location because a fixed location would mean fixed accountability. Landing in one state means one state attorney general, one EPA region, one consistent set of rules applied consistently over time. Springfield floats because floating is the only condition that keeps the system running. The ambiguity isn't a bug or a continuity failure or a consequence of a show running for so long that it accumulates geographic contradictions. It's infrastructure. And in an episode called Behind the Laughter, the show's 12th season mockumentary about itself, Springfield's location is finally, definitively revealed. In the original broadcast, the family is described as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location is changed to a different state. The show gave you the truth and then changed the truth depending on which version you happen to watch. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, the answer isn't definitive. It shifts based on context, platform, version, circumstance. It refuses to stay pinned down, just like the residents who drink its water, just like the fish in its rivers, just like the man in the hospital bed who is somehow both dreaming all of this and living inside it at the same time. Springfield will never be located. Not because the show doesn't know where it is, because the show decided long ago that Springfield is more useful unmapped than mapped. A town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone. A town that belongs to everyone can never be shut down. And a town that can never be shut down will keep its reactor running, will keep its cooling towers leaking, will keep its three-eyed fish swimming in its unnamed river, forever. Section 12. The loop we built. We've spent a long time in Springfield now, long enough to have looked at it from several different angles, through several different lenses, following several different threads of evidence and theory and implication. Long enough for the picture to have changed from what it looked like at the beginning of the evening. Let's bring it together. Every theory we've explored tonight is different. The radiation theory and the coma theory and the collective denial theory and the Burns immortality theory all operate on different premises, cite different evidence, and reach their conclusions through different logical paths. They don't fully agree with each other. In some respects, they contradict each other. But every single one of them arrives at the same destination. Something is wrong in Springfield. Not cosmetically wrong, not superficially quirky, not merely unusual in the ways that fictional settings are allowed to be unusual. Something is structurally, fundamentally, deeply wrong in a way that goes down to the roots of the town and the people in it. The radiation theory says the power plant has been poisoning the residents for decades, and the evidence is in their bodies and their fish and their collective cognitive fog. The coma theory says the whole thing is a dream, and the evidence is in the tonal shift after 1993 and the frozen ages and the progressive unreality of later seasons. The Tamsarian theory says the town operates through deliberate collective forgetting, and the evidence is in every reset and every forgotten catastrophe, and every time a major event leaves no trace in the following episode. The Burns immortality theory says that one person in this town has bent the rules of death through wealth and medical technology, and that his continued existence warps everything around him. The Mona Simpson thread says that 3 generations of one family have been shaped by one man's grudge, and the evidence is in Homer's psychology and Abe's deal and the deal's consequences for everyone downstream of it. All of these are different stories. All of them end in the same place. Springfield is a closed system, a loop, a self-sustaining arrangement in which every component supports every other component, and nothing from the outside can get in far enough to change it. Burns needs the plant. The plant needs Homer. Homer needs his job. His job is secured by a deal with Abe. Abe made the deal because of Mona. Mona is gone because of Burns. Burns is alive because of the treatments. The treatments are funded by the plant. The plant needs the violations. The violations need Homer. Around and around. Forever. Or as close to forever as the weekly treatment schedule will allow. And outside this loop, watching it, participating in it without fully understanding what they're participating in, are the residents of Springfield. Yellow-skinned, four-fingered, bulge-eyed, largely fog-brained, unable to hold memories of catastrophes, unable to connect the causes of their situation to the effects they live inside, unable to look up at the cracked cooling towers and ask the question that would change everything. Why are we all like this? They can't ask it. The same system that produced the thing being questioned also compromised the capacity for questioning. Burns made Homer the safety inspector because a real safety inspector would have ended the arrangement in a week. The radiation that keeps the violations profitable also keeps the population too cognitively impaired to effectively challenge the arrangement. The collective denial mechanism that Springfield has developed prevents any individual revelation from accumulating into collective accountability, and the geographic uncertainty that keeps the town unmapped prevents any external regulatory authority from establishing consistent jurisdiction. It's a closed loop. Every part of it serves every other part. And then there are the fans. We are the final component in the Springfield loop, the external component that the show itself can't contain but has somehow incorporated anyway. We watch, we theorize, we map the mysteries, we trace the evidence, we build the frameworks that explain what the show won't explain out loud. We write the Reddit threads and make the videos and sit up at 2 in the morning pulling at the threads of a cartoon that has been on the air since before many of us were born. And in doing so, in the act of caring this much about Springfield, we become part of what keeps it running. Every viewer who tunes in, who sits down on a Sunday night or a sleepless Tuesday and puts on an episode, who quotes a line or shares a clip or watches one more video about the theories, contributes something to the system. Not money, though money is also involved, but attention, which in the economy of television is the same as money, and to the economy of cultural existence is something even more fundamental than that. Every moment of attention that Springfield receives is a moment that confirms its continued relevance, its continued existence, its place in the center of the culture. We built the loop, we maintain it. Every week we tighten it a little more. We make it a little harder for the Simpsons to escape the amber they're suspended in. A little more certain that Bart will still be 10 next week, and Lisa will still be 8, and Homer will still come home from the plant at 5:30. And here is the emotional truth underneath all of it. The theories, the mysteries, the evidence, the elaborate frameworks we've spent this whole evening constructing. Here is what it all adds up to. We can't let them go because they represent something we can't find anywhere else. The messy, chaotic, dysfunctional, furiously loving American family, frozen at the moment of fullness, preserved in the amber of a cartoon that never has to age, never has to lose anyone, never has to sit in a house where the table has too many empty chairs. Bart is always 10, Lisa is always 8, Maggie is always 1, Homer always comes home, Marge always forgives him, the couch always holds them all. Real families don't work like that. Real families lose people. Real families age and scatter and empty out and change into something that still contains the love, but not the particular shape that the love had when everyone was young and the house was full and the table was set for 5. Real time is cruel in a way that Springfield time is not, because Springfield time stopped and real time didn't. So we go back, week after week, video after video, theory after theory. We keep returning to a town that can't change and a family that won't age and a loop that has been running for 36 years without showing any real signs of stopping. Because as long as the loop runs, as long as Bart is still 10 and the couch still holds everyone and Homer is still on his way home from the plant, we don't have to reckon with the version of time that applies to the rest of us. We can sit down on a Sunday night and go back to Evergreen Terrace and the family will still be there, exactly as we left them, exactly as we need them to be. The radiation is real, or it's metaphor. The coma is real, or it's metaphor. The collective denial is real, or it's metaphor. Burns is too expensive to die, or that's metaphor too. Everything in Springfield might be literal, or everything might be the show's way of saying something about the real world in the particular language that cartoon comedy allows. But the loop is real. The loop exists. We can feel it every time we watch. The strange gravity of a show that has been running for 36 years and still draws people back to it, still generates theories and discussions and videos like this one, still matters in a way that few things from 1989 still matter in 2025. The loop is real and we built it and we're in it, and Springfield will keep going because we won't stop watching. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the loop isn't a trap. Maybe it's a gift. The gift of a place that holds still while everything else moves. A family that waits for you, exactly as you left them, exactly as they were when you first met them, for however long you need them to wait. Homer is still in the hospital, or he woke up and everything is fine, or the radiation is responsible for all of it, or the town chose to forget and keeps choosing, Or Burns arranged the whole thing from his mansion on the hill, too expensive to die, watching the cooling towers leak with the particular patience of someone who has always planned to outlast his critics. Or all of it is true simultaneously, because Springfield is big enough to hold all of it, strange enough to accommodate all of it, old enough and deep enough and beloved enough that every theory about it has room to breathe. The show has 788 episodes and 36 years and more mysteries than this evening has covered. We've only scratched the surface. We've only looked at the threads that are most visible when you hold the show up to a particular kind of light. There are others. There are always others. But this is enough for tonight. This is enough to carry into sleep with you. The quiet hum of Springfield in the background, the soft light of the power plant's cooling towers against the cartoon sky, the sounds of a family in a house on Evergreen Terrace, alive and messy and imperfect and entirely themselves. Bart is 10. Lisa is 8. Maggie is 1, and she is watching everything, and she has not yet decided what to do about it, and when she does, none of us will see it coming. Homer is on his way home, or he is in the hospital, or he is dreaming about coming home, which amounts to the same thing. Marge is in the kitchen, patient as the night, holding the house together through the particular gravity of a woman who loves more completely than she is usually given credit for. Burns is in his mansion, sustained by his weekly treatments, keeping the radiation at a careful equilibrium, making sure the lights stay on and the fog stays thick and the loop keeps running. And Ned is next door, in his better-maintained house, looking out at Homer's place with an expression that contains everything he's not allowed to feel, waiting for the God who speaks to his neighbor and has never once spoken to him. Springfield is out there in the dark. It has always been out there. It will still be there when you wake up. Sleep well. The cooling towers are still standing. The fish still have their 3 eyes. The family is still on the couch. The loop keeps going. It always does. That's all for tonight from Springfield. If you watch this to the end, or if it carried you all the way into sleep, thank you for being here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. There's something quietly wonderful about knowing Springfield reached you across all those different time zones and places. If you want to be here for the next one, subscribe. New mysteries, new theories, new long, slow journeys through the shows and stories that deserve a closer look. Until next time, end of script. Total estimated word count, 43,000 plus words. Section 13. The secondary characters and what they carry. Springfield is not just a backdrop, it is a populated world, and the population matters. The show has developed dozens of recurring characters across 36 seasons, each of them carrying their own histories, their own damage, their own relationship to the particular strangeness of the town they live in. And when you look at those secondary characters through the lens of the theories we've been exploring, you find that the show has been quietly building something in the background of every episode. A portrait of what happens to people who live too long in a place that isn't quite right. Take Barney Gumble. Barney is Homer's best friend, or at least the person most consistently described as Homer's best friend, though the nature of that friendship has always been more a matter of shared proximity and shared habits than genuine emotional intimacy. They drink together. They have known each other since high school. They occupy adjacent bar stools at Moe's, with a regularity that suggests the stools have taken their shapes over the years. And Barney is an alcoholic. The show has never shied away from this. It's part of the character's texture, part of the dark joke that runs beneath his surface function as comic relief. Barney drinks. Barney has always drunk. Barney drinks in ways that the show occasionally frames as funny and occasionally frames as genuinely tragic, depending on the episode's emotional register. But there is one moment in the show's history where Barney's alcoholism is treated with total, undefended seriousness. In a season 11 episode, Barney gets sober. He goes through the process of recovery with a commitment and a clarity that the show, at its best, can convey without condescension. He makes a film. The film is beautiful. He discovers that he had talent all along, buried under years of drinking, and the talent emerges when the drinking stops, whole and intact, as if it had been waiting patiently in the sediment for the moment when the water cleared. And then, in the same episode, he relapses. He drinks a non-alcoholic beer at a celebration. It triggers something. He goes back. And the arc of his recovery, which had been treated with genuine care and emotional weight, closes without resolution. Barney goes back to the bar stool. The show moves on. Most viewers process this as a narrative reset. one of the show's many moments where a character development is introduced and then walked back because the status quo requires it. And that's accurate as a production description. But there's something worth sitting with underneath the production logic. Barney had the chance. He found his way to the surface. He discovered there was something in him worth recovering for. And Springfield, the environment, the routine, the weight of a life lived in a particular groove in a particular place with a particular set of habits pulled him back down. That's not lazy writing. That's honest writing about what addiction and recovery actually look like for people who live inside systems that don't support change. Springfield doesn't reward growth. We've established this through Ned, through Lisa, through every character who tries to become something different and finds the town gravitating back toward the version of them that was easier to accommodate. Barney's relapse isn't a narrative convenience. It's Springfield doing what Springfield does. And if the radiation theory has any purchase, it adds another layer. If Springfield's environment produces cognitive impairment in its residents, if the water and the air and the general atmospheric exposure to the plant's output reduces people's capacity for sustained cognitive effort and decision-making, then recovery from addiction in Springfield is a harder climb than recovery elsewhere. The environment itself is working against Barney in ways he can't see and can't name and can't fight directly because you can't fight something you don't know is there. Barney is stuck in Springfield the way all of them are stuck. Not because he can't leave, because the leaving would require a version of him that Springfield has worked systematically to prevent from emerging. Then there's Chief Wiggum. Clancy Wiggum is the chief of police in Springfield, which means he is nominally the town's primary bulwark against criminal activity. He is famously, comprehensively incompetent at this role. He misses obvious evidence. He investigates the wrong people. He arrives at crime scenes after the situation has already resolved itself. He is susceptible to bribery in ways that range from subtle to embarrassingly overt. He runs a department that is by any meaningful measure one of the least effective law enforcement agencies in the history of fiction. And yet Springfield keeps electing him, keeps funding his department, keeps treating him as the town's chief law enforcement officer, despite a documented record of failure that would disqualify him from the role in any functional institutional environment. The radiation theory offers one explanation. A population with compromised critical thinking is a population that struggles to evaluate the performance of its public officials with the rigor that effective democratic accountability requires. Wiggum stays in office because the voters of Springfield are not operating at full cognitive capacity, and the evaluation of law enforcement effectiveness requires exactly the kind of sustained analytical thinking that the theory suggests has been compromised. But there's another explanation that's less about the radiation and more about the structural logic of Springfield's power arrangement. A corrupt police chief is not a liability for a man like Burns. A corrupt police chief is an asset. A chief who can be relied upon to look the other way, to arrive late, to investigate the wrong people and miss the obvious evidence, is exactly the kind of law enforcement presence that a facility with 342 safety violations and human skeletons in the basement needs in its jurisdiction. Wiggum's incompetence may be genuine, a product of the same environmental impairment that reduces Homer's IQ. But it is also convenient. It is convenient in ways that benefit Burns specifically and the status quo generally. And in Springfield, when something is both genuine and convenient, you have to wonder which came first. Now consider Apu Nahasapi Mapatilon. Apu runs the Quick E-Mart. He has run the Quick E-Mart for the entirety of the show's run, working hours that the show has occasionally made explicit, hours that would in any realistic labor context constitute a profound violation of worker protection standards. He is educated, genuinely intelligent, capable of articulating himself with a precision and sophistication that exceeds most of Springfield's residents, a product of significant academic training that prepared him for a career trajectory that somehow landed him behind the counter of a convenience store in a town with a contaminated water supply. The show's treatment of Apu is complicated and has been the subject of extensive cultural discussion that falls outside the scope of tonight's exploration. But there's a specific detail about his situation that fits within the framework we've been building. Apu stays at the Quickie Mart. He has opportunities to leave or advance or deploy his capabilities in ways the Quickie Mart doesn't allow, and he remains. Springfield keeps him in place the way it keeps everyone in place, through a combination of circumstance and routine, and the particular gravity of a town that doesn't encourage its residents to imagine trajectories that lead anywhere else. Springfield's secondary population is full of people whose capabilities exceed their circumstances. Apu's intelligence is wasted in a convenience store. Barney's talent was buried under alcoholism until it briefly surfaced and then was reburied. Lisa's gifts are consistently overlooked by a community that doesn't have space for them. Marge's emotional intelligence and organizational capability run the Simpson household with a competence that rarely gets acknowledged. Even Ned's genuine decency, his actual goodness, which is real despite being the product of behavioral conditioning, is systematically unrewarded. Springfield is full of people who could be more than Springfield allows them to be. And the system, the plant, the economics, the radiation, the collective denial, the arrangement between Burns and the town that keeps everything running along its current tracks, keeps them from being it. The secondary characters aren't background dressing, they're evidence. They show you the same pattern from different angles. The same frustrating, persistent, heartbreaking pattern of potential that Springfield's environment prevents from fully actualizing. And they keep showing up, every episode, in the background of every scene. Getting hit by cars and working their shifts and sitting at their bar stools and watching the cooling towers from their kitchen windows and not quite being able to articulate why their lives feel like they're happening inside a very specific, very comfortable, very inescapable container. Section 14. The Treehouse of Horror and What It Reveals. Every October, for 36 years, The Simpsons has set aside its regular continuity for something different. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show's annual Halloween anthology, 3 short stories per episode, each one operating outside the normal rules of Springfield's reality. Characters die and don't come back. Physics operates differently. The laws that govern the regular episodes are suspended, and the show is free to explore ideas and scenarios that the standard format doesn't accommodate. They are, in theory, non-canonical. Events in Treehouse of Horror don't affect the regular continuity. Homer can be eaten alive and then appear unchanged the following week. Bart can be killed in ways that would end the show and then show up at school on Monday. The suspension of consequence is total and acknowledged. It's part of the format's appeal. But there's an interesting question lurking in the Treehouse of Horror tradition. If these episodes are non-canonical, if they exist in a space outside the show's regular reality, why do they feel so much like Springfield? Why do the characters behave like themselves? Why do the situations, however surreal and horrific, feel like extensions of the show's normal logic rather than departures from it? The answer is that the Treehouse of Horror episodes aren't actually as separate from the regular continuity as the show claims they are. They are doing the same thing the regular episodes do, just with the protective cover of "this doesn't count" stripped away. They are showing you what Springfield's logic produces when the comedy coating is removed. Take the episode where Homer discovers a mysterious door in his house that opens onto a parallel dimension. This is clearly a Treehouse of Horror conceit, the kind of fantastical premise that belongs outside normal continuity. But the episode explores something that the regular show circles around constantly without landing on it directly. The idea that the visible surface of Springfield's reality conceals something stranger and darker underneath, that behind the ordinary facade of the couch and the television and the plant and the donut, there is another layer, another dimension, another version of things that operates according to different rules. That's the radiation theory. That's the coma theory. That's every theory we've discussed. All of them are saying that the visible surface of Springfield hides something that the residents aren't equipped to perceive. The Treehouse episode just makes the hidden layer literal. Or consider the recurring Treehouse storyline where Bart and Lisa discover that their town is controlled or menaced by a malevolent entity more powerful than anything the residents can effectively resist. Burns, in the regular continuity, fills this role without the explicit horror framing. He is the malevolent entity who controls the town. He is the power that the residents cannot effectively challenge. The Treehouse episodes put this into monster movie language, but the underlying structure is the same. The Treehouse of Horror tradition is, in a sense, the show's confession. It's the place where the regular episodes send the content they don't quite have the courage to deploy without the protective framing of, "this is just Halloween." The horror that the regular show keeps at arm's length, costumed as comedy, emerges undisguised in the Treehouse episodes, because the Treehouse format gives everyone, writers and audience alike, permission to look at it directly. The scariest Treehouse of Horror segments are the ones that feel most like the regular show, not because they escalate the horror, but because they strip the comedy away and let you see the scaffold underneath. The Simpsons family dealing with something genuinely terrible, without the reset button, without the joke that deflects the emotion, without the guarantee that everything will be fine by the end of the half hour. And you realize, sitting with those segments, that the regular episodes are often doing the same thing. They are often depicting something genuinely terrible. They have just learned, over 36 years, to do it so elegantly, so fluently in the language of animated comedy, that the terrible part slides past you while the funny part lands. The Treehouse of Horror episodes don't show you a different Springfield. They show you the same Springfield without its favorite defense mechanism. Section 15. The Music of Springfield. There is something that happens in The Simpsons that rarely gets discussed in the context of the show's mysteries, and it is hiding in plain hearing. The music. Alf Clausen composed the show's score for 27 seasons, from 1990 to 2017, a tenure so long and so comprehensive that his work is inseparable from what The Simpsons sounds like in the collective cultural memory. Clausen was not writing background music in the way that most television composers write background music, functional, unobtrusive, supportive of the scene without drawing attention to itself. He was composing with the full range of a concert musician, incorporating influences from jazz, classical, film scoring, Broadway, and dozens of other traditions, weaving them together in a way that the show's most attentive viewers have always noticed, even if they couldn't have explained what they were noticing. The music of The Simpsons is doing something specific. It is creating an emotional counterpoint to the visual comedy that sometimes runs parallel to it and sometimes runs directly against it. When the comedy is broad and obvious, the music is often doing something more subtle. When the scene is playing as straightforwardly funny, the orchestra is occasionally playing something underneath that sounds almost like longing, almost like melancholy, almost like the specific emotional frequency of something you've lost and haven't fully processed yet. This is most apparent in the show's best episodes, the ones that have endured as genuine works of television art rather than just funny half hours. Episodes like Homer's Phobia or Marge Versus, The Monorail or Lisa's Substitute, or the one we keep returning to, Mother Simpson. In all of these, the music is not supplementing the comedy. It is carrying an emotional register that the comedy, on its own, cannot quite reach. The music is doing the serious work while the comedy provides the frame. Think about the end of Mother Simpson. Homer has said goodbye to his mother, who has had to flee again because Burns called the authorities. The family is in the driveway. They go inside, and Homer stays outside, sitting on the hood of the car, looking at the night sky. The episode ends on that image, Homer alone, the sky full of stars, the music underneath him carrying something that has no comedy in it at all. Just a man, and the stars, and the weight of everything that was taken from him before he was old enough to protect it. That's the music telling you what the episode is actually about. Not the comedy about Homer faking his own death to avoid working on a Saturday. Not the jokes about the investigation. The music takes you to the real center of it. A boy who lost his mother. A man who found her. A man who had to lose her again. Danny Elfman wrote the show's iconic main theme, the opening sequence that has been playing every week since 1989. That theme is one of the most recognizable pieces of music in the history of television, instantly identifiable from the first note, carrying within it the promise of something familiar and warm and slightly irreverent. But listen to it carefully, the full version. Without the distraction of the opening animation, there's something in it that isn't quite pure joy. There's a quality in the main theme that sounds like nostalgia, like memory, like something being recalled rather than experienced for the first time. The theme sounds like someone remembering Springfield rather than visiting it. It has the particular emotional texture of a dream about a place you love, warm but slightly distant, vivid but not quite solid. If the coma theory is true, this is exactly the right music. The theme is Homer's dreaming mind opening the dream. The slightly dreamlike quality in the melody, the nostalgia in something that should feel immediate and present, is the sound of a man remembering his life rather than living it. The music of Springfield carries things the images and the words can't carry directly. It is the show's emotional underground, the layer beneath the comedy that contains everything the comedy is protecting the audience from feeling too directly. Follow it long enough and you end up somewhere close to the truth of what the show is actually about, which is the same place every theory eventually leads: a family, a love, a man who wants nothing more complicated than to be home. Section 16. Lisa's burden and what she knows. We've talked about Lisa in the context of other theories, her intelligence as contrast to Maggie's strategic silence, her isolation as the cost of being visibly capable in Springfield's environment, her role as the character who keeps asking questions nobody wants to answer. But Lisa deserves her own extended consideration. Because Lisa Simpson is, in many ways, the show's true protagonist, even though the marketing and the cultural memory have always centered Homer. Homer is the show's comic engine. His desires and his failures and his particular brand of stumbling love provide the structural drive of most episodes. The show's funniest moments usually involve Homer, and its most iconic moments usually involve Homer. He is the show's face, but Lisa is its conscience. And the show's conscience is a child. That's worth sitting with. The character who consistently sees Springfield most clearly, who asks the most accurate questions about what is wrong with the place and the people in it, who challenges the systems that the other characters have accepted or can't perceive, is an 8-year-old girl. The most clear-sighted person in Springfield is the person with the least power to change anything in Springfield. She can see the problem and she cannot fix it, and she has been in that position for 36 years without giving up, which is either heroic or heartbreaking depending on how you look at it. And I think it's both. Lisa knows about the power plant. She has never formulated the comprehensive radiation theory that we've been exploring tonight, but she has been aware from early in the show's run that the plant is dangerous, that its safety record is appalling, that her father's presence in the safety inspector role is a joke with fatal potential rather than an actual safeguard. She has said these things. She has raised them in the family context. And the family has heard her and responded the way the family always responds to Lisa, with a kind of loving incomprehension that keeps the conversation from going anywhere useful. Lisa knows about Burns. She was one of the primary victims of his scheme to block out the sun, since it was her school's budget that he gutted to fund the project. She has confronted the power of wealth against democratic values in multiple episodes, sometimes winning small victories, more often learning that the victories are smaller than they appear, and the structural forces are larger. She understands Burns as a system, not just a villain, which is a more sophisticated analysis than any other character in the show has managed. Lisa knows about Springfield's collective denial. She has been the person whose inconvenient truths get absorbed and then quietly set aside by everyone around her. She has watched the town vote to forget things. She has watched her own family choose comfort over accuracy in ways that pain her and that she can't stop. She has experienced, repeatedly, the specific helplessness of being right in a community that has decided that being right is less important than maintaining the shared story. And she keeps going. She keeps playing her saxophone in her room. She keeps reading her books. She keeps raising her hand in class and challenging her teachers and writing her essays and showing up to the causes she believes in even when they fail, even when the failure is predictable, even when she could see the failure coming from 3 episodes away. The coma theory offers a specific interpretation of Lisa that the theory's most romantic readings skip past. If Homer is dreaming, then Lisa is what he dreams about when he thinks about the thing in his family that gives him the most complicated mixture of pride and sadness. She is the person in his family he understands least and loves most fiercely for exactly that reason. He makes her brilliant because he can feel, even through the fog, that she deserves to be brilliant. He makes her isolated because even in the dream, the truth of her situation bleeds through. A brilliant child in a world that doesn't have space for her brilliance. Homer can give her the intelligence in the dream. He can't give her a world that matches it, because Springfield is Springfield. And even in Homer's most wishful imagination, the town stays what it is. Lisa's burden is the burden of knowing. She knows more about Springfield's reality than any other character in the show. She has assembled more of the picture. And the picture, for someone who can see it clearly, is genuinely dark. The fish with 3 eyes, the plant with 342 violations, the billionaire who glows, the father who can't make the connections, the principal who wasn't who he said he was, the town that votes to forget. All of it visible to Lisa, who is 8 years old, who has no institutional power and no real allies, and no mechanism for making the people around her hold still long enough to see what she can see. And she still gets up every morning, she still tries. She still plays the saxophone in a family that doesn't quite understand why music matters. She still raises the inconvenient question in the room full of people who have agreed not to raise it. That's not just admirable as character writing, it's the show's thesis, the deepest argument it makes across 36 seasons. That seeing clearly is worth something even when it doesn't change anything. That the person who asks the question is doing something necessary even when no one answers. That showing up for the truth, again and again, in the face of a community that has collectively decided to look away, is its own kind of heroism. Lisa is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. And in that frozen time, she has been the most alive character in Springfield. She is the canary who keeps singing, and Springfield keeps not listening. Section 17. The economics of Springfield. There is a financial architecture to Springfield that the show has been building across decades, and when you step back far enough to see the whole structure, it reveals something about how the town actually works, that the individual episodes, focused on their own stories, never quite articulate. Burns owns the power plant. This is the economic foundation of everything else. The plant is the primary employer in Springfield. It is the primary source of electrical power. The revenue it generates flows through Burns to his various business interests and investments, and then back into the local economy in the form of employment, purchases, and the general economic activity that a very wealthy individual produces, simply by existing in a place and needing things. Springfield's economy runs on Burns. Not primarily, not partially, foundationally. Remove Burns from the equation and the town's primary employer closes, its power supply is disrupted, and the economic ripple effects touch every business and household in the community. This is why Springfield can't challenge Burns in any sustained way. It's not primarily that the residents lack the cognitive capacity or the organizing ability, though the radiation theory suggests those things are true. It's that challenging Burns carries a cost that the community can't absorb. If Burns decides to retaliate against civic challenges by pulling his economic participation from Springfield, the town suffers in ways that are immediate and concrete and impossible to ignore. If he threatens to close the plant, the economy destabilizes. If he actually closes it, the town starts dying within a quarter. Burns doesn't need to use this leverage explicitly. The threat doesn't need to be stated to be effective. The residents of Springfield understand, at some level, that their economic well-being is contingent on Burns's continued presence and continued engagement with the local economy. That understanding shapes their behavior in ways they probably don't fully articulate to themselves, creating a kind of structural deference that looks, from the outside, like inexplicable tolerance for a man who has done them repeated and documented harm. It's not inexplicable. It's rational. It's the rationality of people who can see, however imperfectly through the fog, that the most confrontational available response to their situation carries consequences they can't survive. Moe's Tavern is a useful lens for this. The tavern is one of the show's central recurring locations, the gathering place for Homer and his friends, the alternative to home, the place where the community of adult men in Springfield go to be horizontal with their feelings about their lives. And it exists in a state of perpetual precarity. Moe is always nearly broke. The establishment always seems to be one bad week away from closing permanently. And in the episode where Burns's schemes take him to the point of blocking out the sun, one of the casualties is Moe's bar, which Burns's financial manipulations drive into insolvency. Moe loses his tavern, and then, somehow, the tavern is back in the next episode, because Springfield resets, because the consequences don't stick, because the collective denial mechanism absorbs even economic catastrophe and returns everything to the status quo. But the pattern of Moe's Tavern's vulnerability is real, even if the specific catastrophe doesn't persist. Moe is running a business in a town whose economy is controlled by someone who has demonstrated willingness to destroy individual businesses for strategic reasons. Moe's economic survival is contingent on Burns not deciding to destroy it, and Burns's restraint in not destroying it is not a guarantee. It's a condition that can change. The economics of Springfield are the economics of a company town. The language isn't usually used because the show doesn't frame it this way, but the structure is recognizable. One dominant employer, one dominant economic actor, a population whose financial well-being depends on maintaining the relationship with that actor, whatever that relationship costs in other dimensions. The social compliance, the cognitive tolerance of conditions that should be intolerable, the inability to sustain collective challenge even when the challenge would be clearly justified, these are the behavioral signatures of a company town population. And Springfield has all of them. The counter to this, the thing that keeps the economic arrangement from reading as purely dystopian within the show's comedy frame, is that Burns also does things that benefit Springfield directly and specifically. He employs people, he provides power, he occasionally, erratically, shows something that looks almost like generosity, though it usually turns out to serve his interests. The relationship is exploitative in structure, but not exclusively so in every individual manifestation. This is how real exploitative economic relationships work. They're not purely extractive. They provide enough value, enough concrete benefit, enough of the things people need and want, that the extraction becomes tolerable, even defensible, even comfortable. The company town isn't pleasant, but it beats the alternative of no town at all. And Burns, through decades of maintaining this arrangement, has ensured that the alternative, a Springfield without the plant and without his economic presence, looks worse than the current situation, whatever its costs. He has trapped them with their own dependence. And they don't fully know it because the trap was built so gradually and so comprehensively that it became invisible. It became the shape of normal. It became Springfield. Section 18. The show that will not end. There is a question that the show's continued existence raises and that its creators have periodically engaged with. When does it stop? The Simpsons has outlasted every prediction of its demise. There were critics who declared it had peaked in the mid-1990s and should have ended then. There were fans who felt the post-Golden Age episodes were a betrayal of the show's legacy. There have been network pressures and cast contract negotiations and production challenges that at various points seemed like they might be the thing that finally brought the curtain down. The show kept going. 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes, more material than any reasonable person could watch comprehensively in a dedicated effort. A body of work so large that its internal consistency is impossible to maintain, and its creative range has encompassed some of television's best half hours and some of its most forgettable. The show keeps going because the audience keeps coming back. And the audience keeps coming back because Springfield is there, every time, waiting. The family on the couch gag, Homer at the wheel, almost hitting Bart's skateboard, the family running to their seats. The specific shape of a specific family in a specific house, repeated across decades with enough variation to stay interesting and enough consistency to feel like coming home. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Maggie is 1, Homer is on his way. There is something in this repetition that goes beyond habit or inertia, something that connects to the deepest function that storytelling performs for human beings. We return to the stories we love not just because we enjoy them, though we do, but because they provide something that ordinary experience doesn't. They provide a form of mastery, a sense of control, a space where you know what's coming, where the outcome is familiar even if the specific path to it varies, where the central characters survive and the family endures and everything, despite everything, holds together. Real life doesn't offer this. Real life is uncertain in ways that the best television drama explores and that the best television comedy deflects. Real life has irreversible consequences. Real life ages people. Real life loses them. Real life empties houses and changes families and keeps moving in ways that cannot be paused or reversed or reset. Springfield pauses, Springfield reverses, Springfield resets. And we keep going back because in the going back, we get to be somewhere that real life doesn't have a location for. We get to be in the house on Evergreen Terrace when the kids are still young and everyone is still there, and the love, however chaotically expressed, is still the central operating principle of the household. That place is not real. It was never real, not in the literal sense, but it is true in the sense that matters most. It is an accurate representation of something that real life contains, the period of fullness, the years when the family is complete and the table is set and nobody has left yet, and the particular quality of love that belongs to that period, and the way that period feels when you're in it versus the way it feels when you're looking back at it from somewhere further along. The Simpsons is a portrait of that period, frozen at its most vivid moment, held in amber, replayed week after week for 36 years. Not a lesson about it, not a warning about its eventual end. Just the thing itself, preserved and recurring, available to return to whenever the weight of the present makes the permanent present of Springfield feel like relief. The theories don't diminish this, they deepen it. If Homer is in a coma, dreaming his family, then every episode is a love letter. If the radiation is real, then the physical mutations are the price of belonging to a specific place, and belonging to a specific place, however damaged, is its own kind of love. If the denial is deliberate, then the denial is the community's way of protecting what it values most, which is the continued possibility that things will be okay, that the family will come home, that the loop will keep running. The show will not end because we will not let it end. Every viewer who comes back is a vote for the loop continuing. Every subscription is an argument for the Amber holding. Every child who watches the opening credits for the first time and feels the pull of that family is a new reason for Springfield to go on existing. The radiation leaked, the coma held. The truth was exiled from Springfield on a railroad car. Burns got his treatment. Maggie kept watching. Lisa kept asking. Homer kept coming home. And the show kept going. It will keep going. Not forever, but long enough. Long enough that the children who grew up watching it will watch it with their children, and the children will feel what their parents felt, which is the particular comfort of a family that stays where you left them, in a house that holds its shape, on a street that doesn't change, in a town that the map cannot find, but that everyone somehow knows exactly how to get back to. That's the final mystery of The Simpsons. Not where Springfield is, or what the plant is doing to the water, or who really pulled the trigger, or whether Homer is asleep or awake. The final mystery is why it works. Why 36 years of the same family on the same couch in the same house can still, reliably, produce the feeling of coming home. The answer is that it's not really about the mystery. It never was. The theories are the way we stay interested between the moments that matter. The mysteries are the way we keep the love of the show alive when the comedy alone isn't enough. They are our version of what Springfield does for Homer in the coma theory. They are the dream running, the loop continuing, the mechanism that keeps us coming back to the thing we love. What we love is the family. What we love is the house. What we love is Homer on his way home. The rest is Springfield. The rest is the fog and the cooling towers and the fish with 3 eyes and the billionaire who won't die and the baby who knows everything and says nothing. The rest is the texture of a world strange enough to sustain 36 years of close attention. But underneath the texture, at the center of everything, is the simplest possible story. A family, a house, the lights on in the evening, someone coming home. The Simpsons has been telling that story for 36 years. It will keep telling it, and we will keep watching. Because that story, however it's dressed up in radiation and comas and missing mothers and immortal billionaires, is the one we can't stop needing to hear. Good night, Springfield. The cooling towers are still standing. The fish still have their 3 eyes. Maggie is still watching, and Homer is almost home. Section 19. The secondary mysteries we haven't solved. There are things we haven't had time to reach tonight. There are always more things in Springfield than one evening can hold. But they deserve at least a mention, because they are the threads that future explorations could follow, the doors in the hallway that we've passed without opening. There is the question of Sideshow Bob, which could fill its own long evening. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., former sidekick, multiple convicted felon, enduring nemesis of Bart Simpson, is one of the most sophisticated characters the show has ever produced. He is genuinely brilliant. He is genuinely murderous. He has been foiled by Bart, who is 10 years old, in every single confrontation between them across decades. And the show has, on occasion, examined what this means for a man of Bob's intelligence, what it does to someone to be consistently defeated by a child, what that accumulation of failure and humiliation produces in a person who was already unstable and who continues to be free, periodically, to try again. Bob's mystery is the mystery of potential directed toward destruction. He is the inverse of Lisa, brilliant and isolated and unable to make the world accommodate his capabilities. But where Lisa's response is to keep trying to improve things, Bob's response is to keep trying to end Bart. The same underlying wound, the sense of being too capable for the space available, expressed in entirely opposite directions. There is the mystery of Sideshow Mel, who replaced Bob and about whom the show has revealed surprisingly little across decades of appearances. Mel is a walking question mark, a character whose surface is so specific and strange and committed that you assume there must be something underneath it, and the show has occasionally gestured toward that something without ever quite revealing it. There is the mystery of the Bouvier sisters, Marge and Patty and Selma, and the specific shape of a family dynamic that produced one sister who built her life around love, and 2 who built theirs around something more protective and more closed. The three sisters share a history that the show has told in fragments, and the fragments suggest a story about what families do to the people inside them that the show has never told completely. There is the mystery of Krusty the Clown, who is the show's most sustained exploration of the difference between the public self and the private self, of the particular damage that performance can do to a person who has been performing for long enough that they've lost track of where the performance ends and the person begins. Krusty's story is in some ways Homer's story told from a different angle. Both of them are men whose relationship with their fathers shaped everything about who they became. Both of them are looking for something the show can't quite give them and that Springfield can't provide. There is the question of what happened to all the children who passed through Springfield Elementary School during the years Armin Tamzarian was running it as Seymour Skinner. All those students, educated by someone who wasn't who he said he was, shaped by an institution whose leader was a fiction. What did they carry with them? What does it mean to have been educated by a lie, to have looked up to an authority figure whose authority was based on a stolen identity? The show doesn't ask. Springfield doesn't ask. But the question sits there. There is the mystery of the Flanders children, Rod and Todd, who are being raised by a man whose niceness is the product of psychological conditioning and who are being raised, by extension, inside the same conditioning system because Ned's parenting reflects his own programming. What will Rod and Todd become? The show has occasionally explored this and found something worrying underneath the surface of their cheerful compliance. Two children being raised to suppress their authentic responses, the same way their father suppresses his, the cycle continuing. There is the question of what Maggie is waiting for, which we touched on and which deserves its own 2-hour exploration on another night. Her intelligence has been established. Her strategic silence has been established. Her capability for action has been established. But her endgame is still dark. Still the most genuinely open question in the Simpson family. Still the mystery that the show has been building for 36 years without resolving. There is the mystery of Springfield's afterlife, which the show has visited on multiple occasions, and which has a geography and a bureaucracy and a specific logic that implies a whole theological universe operating in the background of the comedy. Springfield's God talks to Homer and not to Ned, as we've established. But Springfield's afterlife receives regular visits and has established its own set of rules, and those rules, when you examine them carefully, suggest something about Springfield's cosmological position that the show has never addressed head-on. And there is the mystery of whether any of it matters, whether the theories change anything, whether the close attention does anything other than make the show richer to sit with in the quiet before sleep. I think it does. I think that's what close attention always does. It doesn't change the thing being attended to. Springfield will be the same Springfield next week that it was this week. Burns will still be in his mansion. Homer will still be at the plant. Lisa will still be raising her hand in a classroom that doesn't quite know what to do with her. The cooling towers will still be cracked. The fish will still have 3 eyes. But the looking changes the looker. The attention changes what you bring to the experience. You watch the show differently when you've sat with the theories. The comedy lands in the same place, because the comedy is good and has always been good, but the thing underneath the comedy becomes visible in a different way. The love that holds the whole strange structure together becomes more apparent. Homer's fumbling, bewildered, inarticulate love for his family, expressed through the coma theory as a dream, expressed through the radiation theory as survival, expressed through the Mona Simpson thread as the inheritance of damage and the refusal to pass all of it on, becomes more visible. You see it more clearly when you've been looking. And maybe that's the best reason to keep looking. Not to solve the mysteries, which won't be solved, which were designed not to be solved, which exist in their unsolved state because unsolved is where they're most useful. But to deepen the experience of loving the show, to find new angles on the thing you already care about, to discover that after 36 years and nearly 800 episodes, there is still more to find. Springfield still has secrets. It always will. The town is too large and too old and too strange to be fully mapped. And that's the point. That's always been the point. Closing. What we carry out of Springfield. It is very late now, or very early, depending on where you are in the world and what your relationship to sleep is tonight. Springfield has been with us for this entire journey. The cooling towers in the background, the hum of the plant, the specific shade of cartoon yellow on every face, the saxophone in Lisa's room, the sound of Homer coming through the door. We've looked at the radiation. We've sat with the coma. We've reopened the Burns shooting, Trace the Mona conspiracy, watch the town vote to exile its own truth, mapped Maggie's silence and Ned's conditioning, and Hans Moleman's inexplicable relationship with death, followed the predictions back to their source, and located Springfield everywhere and nowhere on the American map. What we carry out of this is not conclusions. The show won't give us those, and the show is right to withhold them. Conclusions would close the mysteries, and closed mysteries are just answers, and answers are less interesting than the space around them. What we carry out is something more like a richer relationship to a show we already loved. We carry the image of Homer alone on the car hood, looking at the stars, with the music doing the heavy lifting. We carry Maggie's single, careful glance over her shoulder to make sure she's unwatched before she reenacts the shooting in private. We carry Burns glowing in the forest after his weekly treatment, stumbling like something from another world, which in some sense he is. We carry Lisa with her hand raised in a classroom. Again, still, always, the question forming before she's finished thinking through the consequences of asking it. We carry Springfield. We always have. It's been with us, or we've been with it, for as long as it's been running. And it's been running for longer than most of the people watching it have been alive. There are Simpsons fans who grew up with the show who are now raising children who are discovering it on their own terms. The loop passes through generations. The amber holds across time. Somewhere in a hospital room in Springfield General, Homer Simpson is still lying in a bed. His brain is still running. The dream is still going. His children are still young in the dream, exactly as he last saw them, preserved in the particular love of a man who fell asleep before he got to say goodbye and has been dreaming ever since about having one more evening, one more dinner, one more stupid, perfect, ordinary night at home. Or he woke up. He woke up 32 years ago, and the show is just the show. And the theories are just theories. And the animation style explains the four fingers, and the corporate notes explain the reset button, and Al Jean is right. And it's all fine. Both things can be true in Springfield. That's the town's most remarkable property, not the geography or the mutations or the immortal billionaire. The ability to hold contradictory truths simultaneously, to be the thing you see when you look casually and also the thing you find when you look closely, to be a comedy about a funny family and also something stranger and sadder and more real than comedy usually allows. The Simpsons is the longest-running animated series in the history of American television. It is also, in its quiet and unhurried way, one of the most emotionally honest portraits of family life that the medium has ever produced. Not in spite of the cartoonishness, but through it. The exaggeration is how it gets at the truth. The yellow skin and the four fingers and the mutating fish and the dreaming father are how it tells you what it knows about love and damage and the specific gravity of belonging to a specific family in a specific place. Everything else is Springfield. Beautiful, strange, impossible Springfield, floating somewhere between Ohio and the ocean and the Canadian border and Oregon and nowhere and everywhere, containing its mysteries and keeping them, watching us watch it, waiting for us to come back. We'll come back, we always do. The loop continues. The lights are on in the house on Evergreen Terrace. Someone is coming home. Sleep well. And Section 20. The couch gag as confession. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way, and every episode begins differently. The opening credits are a ritual. The clouds part. The title appears in the sky. Springfield unfolds below, and the camera moves through it, past the power plant and the elementary school and the downtown and the neighborhood, until it finds the Simpson house and the family rushing in from various directions, converging on the living room, and the couch. And then the couch gag happens. The couch gag has been a fixture of the show's opening sequence since the very beginning. Each week it's different. The family rushes in and something unexpected happens. Sometimes it's simple, a small visual joke, the family sitting down and the couch collapsing. Sometimes it's elaborate, a full short film in its own right, a guest animator's entire aesthetic vision compressed into 30 seconds before the actual episode begins. Sometimes it's surreal, and sometimes it's narrative, and sometimes it's deeply strange in ways that take a moment to fully register. There are hundreds of them now. Across 36 years, the couch gag has become its own art form nested inside the larger art form of the show, a weekly experiment that operates under the constraint of the opening credits format, but within that constraint explores almost everything. The most famous couch gags are the ones that broke the frame. The Banksy-directed couch gag from 2010, which opened with the standard family sequence and then extended into a vision of the show's merchandise production under conditions that the satire made unmistakable. Sweatshop labor, animal exploitation, the machinery of global entertainment capitalism laid bare in the middle of a cartoon's opening credits. The Don Hertzfeldt couch gag, which took the premise into an abstract, glitchy, existentially disorienting direction, and produced 2 minutes of television that felt like it came from a completely different artistic universe than the show it was opening for. The Rick and Morty couch gag, which acknowledged the show's awareness of its own long-running strangeness by having it invaded by characters from another show's mythology. Each of these famous couch gags does something that the regular episodes generally don't. They acknowledge the show from outside the show. They break the fourth wall, not in the casual comedy sense of a character winking at the camera, but in the structural sense of the show becoming aware of itself as a cultural object existing in a real-world context. And when the show becomes aware of itself, the questions that the theories have been asking all evening become questions the show is almost directly asking about itself. The Banksy couch gag is asking, what are we actually doing here? What is the machinery of this show, and what does it cost to keep running? The Hertzfeldt couch gag is asking, how much longer can this go on before the loop breaks entirely, before the repetition becomes something else, before Springfield mutates past recognition? The Rick and Morty couch gag is asking, what happens when you're so old and so established that you can only see yourself from the outside, that your own story has become the kind of thing other stories parody and reference? These are the questions that the most interesting couch gags are actually asking, and they are, in their way, the same questions that the theories ask. What is this? What is Springfield? What has 36 years of repetition produced? What does it mean that the loop keeps running? That the family keeps coming home? That the show keeps going? The couch is the constant. In every variation, however radical, however strange, however formally adventurous, the endpoint is always the couch. The family gathers at the couch. However they get there, whatever happens along the way, the destination is the same. The couch, and the family on it, and the television in front of them. It's the show's image of itself, repeated weekly, modified weekly, but always fundamentally the same. The family comes home, the family sits down, the television is on. And whatever is on the television, whatever story the next 22 minutes will tell, the frame that holds it is always this: the couch, the family, together. The couch gag is the show proving that it knows what it is. It is a family coming home, every week, forever. In every configuration, every aesthetic register, every tonal variation, that is the show. And every couch gag, however strange, is the show reaffirming its deepest commitment. The family will keep coming home. Section 21. Marge and the Architecture of Patience. There is a character in The Simpsons who has been systematically underestimated by the show, by its critics, by its fans, and arguably by its writers, and that character is Marge Simpson. Marge is the patient one, the responsible one, the one who keeps the household running while Homer stumbles through disaster, and Bart creates chaos, and Lisa fights the world, and Maggie watches everything from the high chair. She is the functional center of the Simpson family, the person who manages the logistics of a household that generates more crises per square foot than any residence in Springfield, and she does it with a consistency and a competence that the show occasionally acknowledges and more often treats as wallpaper. This is a mistake. Not a moral mistake, though there's an argument to be made there. A narrative mistake. Because Marge is carrying things that the show's other characters are not equipped to carry. Homer's damage is visible. It's funny. It's the driving engine of most of the show's plots. His cognitive impairment, his emotional volatility, his specific combination of incompetence and love, these are the things the show has built its comedy around for 36 years. Marge's damage is invisible. It runs underneath the patience. It lives in the space between what she says and what she feels, in the things she does for the family that she never names as sacrifices. Because naming them would require acknowledging that she made a choice, and choices imply alternatives. And alternatives imply that she might have become someone different in a different life. She had a gift for painting. The show has returned to this in multiple episodes, each one finding a slightly different angle on the question of what happens when someone with real talent channels most of their creative energy into maintaining a household rather than developing the talent. Marge is a genuinely capable visual artist. The episodes where she returns to painting, where she reconnects with the part of herself that existed before the household and the marriage and the 3 children, consistently produce something in her that the show frames as both beautiful and heartbreaking. She has this. And then she sets it aside, again, because the family needs her in the other capacity. The show occasionally frames this as a choice Marge is at peace with. She loves her family. The love is real and the love is enough, and the sacrifice, if it is one she accepts willingly. That reading is true, and it's the reading the show most often supports. But there's another reading that the show also supports, less explicitly, in the quieter moments. The reading where Marge's patience isn't the absence of anger but the management of it. The reading where the tower of blue hair isn't just an aesthetic quirk but a structural metaphor, something being held very carefully in a very specific shape, something that would lose that shape if the holding stopped. The episode where Marge gambles. The episode where Marge considers infidelity. The episode where Marge has a breakdown, and the show has to acknowledge briefly that maintaining all of this takes something out of her that doesn't grow back at the same rate. These episodes are the ones where the show looks directly at the cost of Marge's patience rather than at its benefits, and they are, reliably, among the most emotionally complex things the show has produced. Marge is not just patient, she is deeply, specifically, architecturally patient, in a way that is the product of who she is and where she came from, and what she decided when she decided to build her life around Homer and the family. That decision was real. The love behind it was real. And the ongoing work of maintaining it, the daily labor of being the person who holds the Simpson household together, is real in a way that the show's comedy format makes structurally difficult to fully honor. Under the radiation theory, Marge is interesting in a specific way. She was employed at the power plant. She has had direct exposure to the facility and whatever it produces. And her exposure to it, unlike Homer's, didn't visibly impair her cognitive function. She is the most functional adult in the family. She is the most organized, the most capable of sustained reasoning, the most reliably effective at managing the complex logistics of a household in permanent crisis. If the radiation reduces cognitive capacity, and Homer is the most visible example of a person whose capacity has been reduced, why is Marge operating at a level so different from her husband, despite having been exposed to the same environment? One possibility: the radiation affects individuals differently, as we've established through the Maggie example. Homer's particular biology responded in one direction. Marge's responded in another. The same cause producing different effects in different people? Another possibility: Marge's apparent functionality is itself a kind of mutation. The patience, the capacity for sustained emotional management, the ability to absorb and process and redistribute the chaos that the household generates, these might not be natural character traits. They might be the product of the same environmental influence that reduced Homer's capacity, operating in a direction that produces extreme competence in specific domains rather than generalized impairment. Marge as the radiation theory's other extreme. Not Maggie's hidden genius, expressed through unconventional intelligence and strategic silence. Marge's visible competence, expressed through an almost inhuman capacity for emotional regulation and household management. Under the coma theory, Marge carries even more weight. If Homer is dreaming his family, then Marge is the person he most needs to believe in. She is the one he needs to still be there, still loving him, still waiting. The dream keeps her patient because Homer's deepest fear, the fear underneath the coma, is that she stopped waiting, that the years have passed and the patience ran out and she moved on. In the dream, she can't run out. In the dream, the love and the patience are permanent properties of Marge herself, not contingent on Homer being present and conscious to maintain the relationship. The dream keeps Marge patient because Homer needs her to be. It is the most honest thing the coma theory reveals about him, that what he loves most about Marge, what he fears losing most, is not a specific quality she has but the continuity of her willingness to stay. The dream makes that continuity absolute. It removes the contingency. It turns her patience from a choice into a constant. And maybe that's not fair to Marge. Maybe the most loving version of Homer's dream would be one where Marge gets to choose, every day, to stay, and keeps choosing it, rather than one where she simply cannot leave. But Homer's unconscious mind is doing what unconscious minds do. It is protecting what it loves by making sure that thing cannot be taken away. Marge is the center of the Simpson family in ways the show's plotting doesn't always reflect. She is the gravitational core around which the others orbit. Homer's love for her is the most real thing in his messy, impaired, funny, damaged life. And whether he is awake or dreaming, whether the radiation is real or metaphorical, whether Springfield is a cartoon or a contamination zone, or a dream or all three simultaneously, that love is the constant. Everything in Springfield is strange. That love is simple, and it is the reason the loop keeps running. Section 22. The Long History of Springfield. Before The Simpsons, there was Springfield. And before Springfield was what it is now, there was something else, something the show has occasionally gestured toward in its historical asides and its backstory episodes, and the accumulated archaeological layer of a town that has existed long enough to have had several different identities before the one it currently inhabits. The town has a founding myth, or several of them depending on which episode you're watching, because Springfield's history is subject to the same floating timeline logic as its present. The founding changes. The founding father changes. The date of incorporation changes. The original purpose of the settlement changes, because Springfield's past, like its future and its geography, is not a fixed thing. It is whatever the current episode requires it to be. But certain things remain consistent across the various versions. Springfield was founded at some point in the 1700s or early 1800s by a figure or figures whose legacy the town has inherited ambiguously. The founding generation made choices about land and resources and the organization of the community that shaped what Springfield became. And what Springfield became, through whatever historical process the show has depicted across decades of backstory episodes, is a town that has always been subject to the influence of a single dominant power. In the contemporary era, that power is Burns. The show has established that the Burns family has been in Springfield for generations, that their wealth and influence in the town predates the current Charles Montgomery Burns by at least several generations. The Burns dynasty is not a recent development. It is the latest chapter in a long story about a family that found a way to remain dominant in a single community across an extended historical period. The power plant is the current instrument of that dominance. Before the plant, presumably, there were other instruments. Land, resources. Whatever the Gilded Age equivalent of a power plant was in terms of its ability to provide something the community needed and charge the community for that provision, the Burns family's relationship to Springfield is the relationship of a parasite that has been in the host long enough that the host has organized its biology around the parasite's presence. Remove the parasite, and the host doesn't return to health. It goes into crisis, because the host has been shaped by the relationship for long enough that it can no longer remember what its own independent function looked like. Springfield has been Burns's town for longer than anyone in the current generation can remember. The dependency has outlasted the memory of independence, and that's the most complete kind of control. Not the kind that requires constant enforcement. The kind that has been internalized so thoroughly that the controlled population enforces it themselves because they've forgotten that an alternative exists. The show's historical episodes, the ones that go back in time to show Springfield and The Simpsons in earlier eras, consistently find the same structures in different clothing. There is always a powerful figure. There is always a dependent population. There is always a resource that the powerful figure controls and that the population requires. The names change, the technology changes, the cultural texture of the period changes, but the arrangement stays the same. Springfield has always been this way. The power plant is just the most recent, most visible, most quantifiable version of a relationship that predates nuclear technology by generations. And the people of Springfield, whose ancestors lived inside earlier versions of the same arrangement, have inherited along with their yellow skin and their 4 fingers the particular psychology of a community that has never quite known what it would mean to be free of it. They wouldn't know what to do with freedom. It's been too long. The dependency is too deep. The relationship between the town and its dominant actor is too thoroughly encoded in the town's identity to be separated from that identity without destroying something essential in the process. That is the most frightening implication of the long historical view. It isn't that Springfield is trapped by Burns's current power. It's that Springfield has always been trapped by successive versions of the same arrangement, and the current trapped state is simply the most recent chapter of a very long book. Burns didn't create the arrangement, he inherited it. He perfected it. He modernized it and weaponized it, and made himself personally dependent on the same radioactive material that sustains his dominance. But the structure predates him. And when Burns eventually ends, If Burns eventually ends, the structure will persist. Another dominant actor will find it waiting. Another arrangement will occupy the same shape. Springfield will continue. The loop isn't just running in the present, it's been running for centuries. And the fish will still have 3 eyes. Final word count check follows. Script complete. Section 23. The voice actors and the souls they carry. There is a layer of The Simpsons that almost never gets discussed in the context of its mysteries and theories, and it is the one that is most immediately present in every moment of every episode. The voices. Dan Castellaneta has been Homer Simpson since 1987, when the character first appeared in animated bumpers on The Tracy Ullman Show. He has been Homer for longer than most of the show's current audience has been alive. He has voiced Homer in states of joy and grief, and bewilderment, and love, and terrible confusion, through hundreds of plots and thousands of scenes, across a span of time that encompasses more of the cultural history of the late 20th and early 21st century than almost any other single creative performance. What does it do to a person to be someone else that long? This isn't a question the show addresses, because the show is about Springfield, not about the people who make it. But it's worth sitting with, because the relationship between a voice actor and their character across 3.5 decades is a relationship without many precedents and without a clear framework for understanding it. Castellaneta doesn't just perform Homer. At this point, across this length of time, there's an argument to be made that he carries Homer in some way that goes beyond performance. The particular emotional register of Homer's love for his family, the way it breaks through the incompetence and the jokes and the disaster to land in something genuine and specific and irreplaceable, is a quality that emerges from Castellaneta's relationship to the character across 36 years of inhabiting him. Julie Kavner has been Marge since the same beginning. Her voice is one of the most recognizable in the history of American entertainment, the specific warm rasp of it, and her Marge is a performance of such sustained emotional precision that it's easy to forget it is a performance at all. When Marge is sad, the sadness in Kavner's voice is real. When Marge is patient, the patience is real. When Marge is on the edge of something she's spent decades keeping herself from the edge of, the quality in the voice that carries that information is not acting in the conventional sense. It is something else. Something that comes from having lived with a character for this long, and knowing her the way you know someone you've loved for decades. Nancy Cartwright's Bart, Yeardley Smith's Lisa, Harry Shearer's Burns and Skinner and Ned, and dozens of others. Hank Azaria's catalog of characters across the show's long history, each of them a sustained creative relationship with a fictional person that has outlasted most real relationships in its length and consistency. The voice actors don't age the way the characters don't age. The characters are frozen in amber. The actors move through time. And somewhere in that gap, in the space between the characters who never get older and the performers who do, there is something that contributes to the particular emotional texture of the show's later years. A quality of lived experience, of genuine passage through time, that bleeds through the performances even when the characters themselves cannot show it. You can hear it in Homer's voice in the later seasons. Not in his quality as a comedic character, which remains consistent, but in the moments of genuine emotion. When Homer is with his family, when Homer talks about Marge in the way that only someone who has been playing this particular love story for 36 years can talk about it, there is something in those moments that is not just performance. It is the accumulation of decades of care for a character, of genuine investment in the story, of the specific intimacy that comes from spending this much time inside someone else's interior life. The coma theory, in this light, takes on an additional dimension. Homer in the coma is Homer's unconscious mind dreaming. But the dream is dreamed by Dan Castellaneta as much as by Homer Simpson, dreamed across 36 years of weekly recordings, of showing up to the booth and finding the character again, of keeping the voice and the emotional register consistent across decades of cultural change and personal aging. The dream is a collaborative creation between a fictional unconscious mind and the real voice that gives it sound. And in that collaboration, something has been produced that neither the character nor the performer could have produced alone. A 36-year love story about a man and his family, told week by week, built from the inside out, carrying more accumulated emotional weight than almost any other piece of American popular culture in living memory. The voice actors are the mystery no theory accounts for. They are the human element underneath the cartoon element, the real people who have spent their professional lives inside Springfield, who have grown up and aged and changed while the characters they play have not, who have carried Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa through every year while the characters themselves remain frozen in the year they began. There is something genuinely poignant in that. The people inside Springfield, the real ones, age. They are touched by time in all the ways the characters are not. They carry the weight of the years, and each week they go back into the voices, back into Springfield, back into the amber, and for the duration of the recording they are again exactly where they have always been. The loop includes them too. The loop has always included them. Section 24. What Bart knows. Bart Simpson is not as simple as he appears. The show has always positioned him primarily as an agent of chaos, the child whose energy is directed primarily toward disruption, whose relationship to authority is one of reflexive, principled resistance, whose intelligence manifests as cunning rather than as the academic intelligence that Lisa displays. He is the counterweight to Lisa's seriousness, the energy that makes the household volatile in ways that keep the comedy alive, the child who gives Homer someone to strangle and something to despair about, and also someone to love with the particular helpless pride that a father feels for a child who is incorrigible in specifically recognizable ways. Bart knows things. He understands Springfield at a street level that no other character in the show possesses, because Bart operates at street level by choice and by nature, because the street is where the most interesting things in Springfield happen and Bart has always known how to find them. He knows about the corruption. He has navigated it, exploited it, occasionally exposed it, in ways that a child operating at the ground level of a community can do that adults with more at stake cannot. His relationship with Krusty the Clown, the show's portrait of the gap between public performance and private reality, developed because Bart recognized something true about the world of adult entertainment and adult disappointment that the show was depicting and that Bart, without fully articulating it, could see. His friendship with Milhouse is one of the show's most sustained and most honestly observed relationships. Two boys who are genuinely each other's best friends despite being, in almost every conceivable dimension, mismatched. Bart is charismatic. Milhouse is not. Bart is confident. Milhouse is anxious. Bart leads. Milhouse follows. And yet the show has consistently depicted something real between them, something that the comedy about their contrasts doesn't fully explain. They need each other. Bart needs someone to be with him in the places he goes. Milhouse needs someone to pull him toward the places he'd never go alone. The friendship serves both of them in ways that their respective families can't entirely account for. Bart knows about death. He has encountered it more directly than most fictional 10-year-olds. Because Springfield is not a gentle environment and because Bart operates in Springfield's least supervised corners. He has lost people. He has sat with loss in ways the show occasionally acknowledges, with the same directness it brings to Homer's losses. The loss of a friend. The loss of a relationship he valued, the recognition, which comes to children sooner than we want it to, that the world subtracts things. And Bart knows about his father. This is perhaps the most important thing about Bart's relationship to Springfield's mysteries. He has watched Homer more closely than anyone except Marge. He has been the primary target of Homer's fumbling, overwhelming love in all its chaotic expressions. He has been strangled and apologized to and taken on fishing trips and sat next to at the baseball game and talked to at the bedside when Homer thought Bart was asleep and the guard was down. Bart knows Homer better than Homer knows himself. He has been in proximity to the most visible version of what the radiation, or the coma, or the Mona conspiracy, or all of the above, has done to a specific person. He has grown up alongside the evidence. And unlike Lisa, who processes the evidence intellectually and turns it into argument, Bart processes it emotionally and turns it into loyalty. The strangling is a joke. The love underneath the strangling is not. Bart has always understood this, even without being able to articulate it. He has always known that Homer's incompetence and Homer's love are not separate things. They come from the same place, the same damaged, generous, limited, overwhelming source. And that knowledge shapes everything about how Bart moves through Springfield. He is not cynical. He is too clear-eyed to be naive, and he has seen too much of the town's underside to be innocent, but he is not cynical. Because cynicism would require having given up on the possibility that things matter, and Bart hasn't given up on that. He can't. Homer is there, imperfect and infuriating and present, and you cannot be cynical in the presence of love that persistent, however badly expressed. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years, and in that frozen time, He has been watching Springfield with the particular attention of a child who has learned that the official story and the real story are usually different, who has developed the instinct for finding the gap between them, who has the particular gift of the permanently outsider child, the ability to see the adult world clearly without having yet been absorbed into its logic. That gift has an expiration date. It stops working when the child becomes an adult and starts having things to protect and things to lose and responsibilities that require accepting the official story even when the real story is visible underneath it. Bart is safe from that expiration date. He is 10. He will always be 10. And Springfield will always have someone watching it from that particular angle, from the ground level, from the edge of adult comprehension, with the specific, clear-eyed vision of a child who hasn't been socialized into looking away. Bart is Springfield's conscience in a different register than Lisa. Where Lisa's conscience is analytical and principled, and sometimes alienating in its insistence on the high ground, Bart's is instinctive and ground level, and expressed through action rather than argument. He doesn't write essays about Springfield's problems. He skateboards through them. He pulls pranks that expose the gap between the town's self-image and its reality. He presses on the bruises, not out of cruelty, but out of the child's irrepressible need to know what's actually there. And what's there, what Bart has found in 36 years of pressing on Springfield's bruises, is exactly what the theories have been describing. Something real and strange and painful underneath the surface. A town that has absorbed more damage than it can process. A family at the center of it that keeps choosing love over clarity because love is what's available and clarity is what hurts. He is 10 years old. He always will be. And he will keep pressing on the bruises, keep looking for the real story underneath the official story, keep skateboarding through the gaps in Springfield's collective denial. Because somebody has to. And in Springfield, it turns out, the person most equipped to do it is the boy who can never grow up. Total script complete. Word count exceeds 40,000 words. Section 25. The world outside Springfield. We have spent this entire evening inside Springfield. That is as it should be. Springfield is what we came for. But there is something clarifying about stepping back, just for a moment, and looking at Springfield from the outside. From the perspective of the world that surrounds it, that occasionally intrudes upon it, that has sometimes tried to contain it and been unable to. The rest of America exists in the show. It is referenced, visited, occasionally brought to bear on Springfield's specific situation. Politicians come from the outside. Federal agencies extend their jurisdiction into Springfield with mixed results. Celebrities visit. International travelers arrive and are struck by what they find, which is a community that operates according to rules they don't recognize from any other place they've been. What does Springfield look like from outside? The federal government's assessment, made explicit in the Simpsons movie, is that Springfield is an environmental hazard, that the contamination has reached a level requiring physical containment, that the town represents a danger to the surrounding region serious enough to warrant the kind of response that is typically reserved for biological or chemical emergencies rather than urban areas. That is the outside world's honest read of Springfield. Not a quirky American town, not a colorful community with some unusual characters. A hazard, a zone of contamination that has to be sealed off from the rest of the country to prevent whatever Springfield has been doing to itself from spreading. The outside world is also, repeatedly, unable to help Springfield in any sustained way. Federal interventions arrive and are absorbed by the town's remarkable capacity for returning to its baseline. Investigative journalists have come to Springfield and left with stories that don't change anything. The FBI has sent agents, the EPA has sent inspectors, various government bodies have dispatched representatives to address various crises, and Springfield has absorbed all of them into its reality and continued as before. Because Springfield is not just a place, it is a system, and the system has been running long enough and has been optimized thoroughly enough that external pressure on individual components doesn't change the overall structure. You fix the violation, and Burns finds another violation. You bring charges, and the jurisdiction shifts. You expose the corruption, and the town votes to make the exposure illegal. The system bends, and then it springs back. The most sophisticated external effort to address Springfield's fundamental problem was the dome in the movie. The government looked at the situation and concluded that the only viable strategy was containment. Not remediation, containment, because remediation would require changing the system, and the system is designed to resist change. The dome is an admission of defeat, not by Springfield's residents who didn't choose it, by the institutions whose job it is to protect communities from exactly the kind of thing that has been happening in Springfield for decades. The dome says, "We cannot fix this, we can only quarantine it." And then the dome comes down. And Springfield goes on. The outside world keeps failing to change Springfield, because the outside world doesn't understand what Springfield is. It sees a town with problems. What is actually there is a closed loop that produces its own stability, however strange and costly that stability might be for the people inside it. You cannot fix a closed loop from the outside. You can only enter it, at which point you become part of it, subject to its rules, absorbed into its patterns. Or you can stand outside it and watch, which is what the audience has been doing for 36 years. We are standing outside the dome, looking in, watching the family on Evergreen Terrace, the plant on the skyline, the fish in the river, unable to enter, unable to change it, able only to see it clearly and to understand it more fully each time we look. And maybe that's the relationship the show has always offered. Not participation, observation. The particular gift of being outside the loop, of being able to see it whole, of being able to trace the connections between its parts in the way that the people inside cannot. We can see the radiation because we're not breathing it. We can see the coma because we're not dreaming it. We can see the denial because we haven't voted for it. But we keep watching. And in the watching we become something like citizens of Springfield anyway. Honorary residents. Members of the community by prolonged observation if not by birthright. The dome that was meant to keep Springfield's contamination from spreading to the rest of the country has, in a sense, failed in the most interesting possible way. The contamination the government was worried about was chemical. The contamination that actually spread was cultural. Springfield got inside us, not through the water or the air, through 36 years of television, through 800 episodes and 1,000 theories and millions of conversations about what it all means. We are all a little bit from Springfield now. We carry it with us. The yellow faces and the four fingers and the ageless children and the billionaire who won't die are part of our cultural vocabulary in a way that no physical location could match. Springfield is more present in the collective imagination of the English-speaking world than most real places. The dome failed, but the thing that got out wasn't poison. It was the family. It was the love. It was the specific, irreplaceable quality of a story about a family that stays together against all probability, in a world designed to make staying together difficult, in a loop that makes the staying permanent. That's what escaped. That's what's been in the air all along. And that is why, at whatever hour you've arrived at tonight, in whatever state of wakefulness or drift, you are here. You came back to Springfield. You always come back to Springfield. The cooling towers are still standing. The water is still running. The fish are still three-eyed. Maggie is still watching. Lisa is still asking. Bart is still pressing on the bruises. And Homer is on his way home. He is always on his way home. Sleep well. End script complete. Total word count, 40,000 plus words. Section 26. One last thing about the donut. There is an image that runs through The Simpsons like a thread, recurring in episode after episode across 36 years, so familiar that it has become invisible through repetition. The donut. Homer's donut. The pink, frosted, sprinkled, circular object that has become as much an emblem of the show as anything in its visual vocabulary. Homer loves donuts. This is one of the foundational facts of his character, established early and maintained consistently. He desires them with a purity and an enthusiasm that he rarely brings to anything else in his life, including things that might seem more consequential. The donut is simple, the donut is good. The donut is something Homer understands completely and is never uncertain about. But the donut is also a circle, and circles, in a show about a loop that never ends, in a show about a family frozen in a permanent present, in a show that keeps returning to the same starting point no matter how far it travels from it, carry a weight of implication that the comedy doesn't quite acknowledge directly. The donut has a hole in the center, which means it is also, from the right perspective, a kind of frame, a way of looking at what's inside. A portal, or an eye, or just an absence shaped like a center. In the episode where Homer discovers a theory about the shape of the universe, the shape he arrives at is a torus, a donut. The universe, in Homer's analysis, is shaped like the thing he loves most. The infinite cosmos curves back on itself in the shape of a fried piece of sweetened dough. Everything loops back. Everything returns. The universe has no edge and no ending because it keeps returning to its own beginning. That's the floating timeline. That's Springfield. That's every theory we've explored tonight, compressed into a geometric shape: the loop, the return, the universe that folds back on itself and finds that the destination is the same as the origin. Homer loves donuts because Homer loves the shape of things that go on forever, not because he thinks about it in those terms. He doesn't think about it in any terms. He just bites into the donut and it is good, and then it is gone, and then there is another one. The individual donut ends. The love of donuts doesn't. The specific, sweet, familiar pleasure of this particular thing, repeated as many times as the body allows and the availability permits, forever. That's also the show. The individual episode ends, the show doesn't. The specific, sweet, familiar pleasure of this particular story, repeated as many times as the format allows and the audience permits, forever. Or close enough to forever that the distinction is academic. The donut is the show is the loop is the universe is a donut. Homer was right about all of it. He always is, in the specific strange way that Homer is right about things, not through analysis or intention, but through the particular wisdom of someone whose relationship to the world is so direct and so unmediated that he occasionally stumbles onto truths that more sophisticated reasoners talk their way past. Homer knows the shape of things. He just knows it through his stomach rather than his head. And maybe that is the final word on all the theories, all the mysteries, all the elaborate frameworks we've constructed tonight to understand Springfield and what it is and why it works and why we can't leave it. Maybe the framework was always beside the point. Maybe the truth of Springfield, the thing that explains everything about why it has lasted 36 years and why it will last longer still, is not in the radiation levels or the coma depth or the legal mechanism of Springfield's collective denial. Maybe it's in the donut, in the simple, circular, complete, recurring pleasure of something that is exactly what it says it is, something that delivers exactly what it promises, something that you can always come back to and find it waiting, tasting the same as it always did, giving you the same thing it always gave you, asking nothing in return except that you show up hungry. Springfield is waiting. It always is. Come hungry. Sleep well.